Everything's good. You have good vibes for some reason. I don't know why. Um,
Oh, I don't know. I'm a cool guy. I have good vibes.
how was
You probably interview a bunch of like crazy people, you know?
actually the people that I'm like trying to interview are more put together. I noticed that they're more of like an educated class. Um, so the people like that I'm really trying to go for are leftist and liberals who are not Muslim, who are supporting the Free Palestine movement. I guess that's what like
Yeah.
interests me the most.
Well, you got one right here, so.
Yeah. First, I'm actually just curious, how was Cuba before we
Oh,
start?
so I mean, I had a terrific trip. I had a great time in Cuba. It's a really lovely country. There's a lot of really interesting stuff to do there, and I went with my girlfriend. Really enjoyed my time. So
Is the
I'm
tourism sector like like is it state funded, or I heard that they're implementing some forms of like capitalism in like the tourism sector, or is that incorrect
Yeah,
information?
no, that's correct. So it's kind of complicated. So there's multiple sectors in Cuba. I don't know how new some of them are and how old some other ones are, right? So uh, I think many of the hotels are state funded. Many of them are like public-private partnerships between the state and between a some kind of international like hotel chain. Like I stayed one night at the Malia, right? Like I was banned from the United States for doing business in Cuba, opening hotels there. Um, the other nights I stayed just in an Airbnb or whatever. So I think as far as the tourism sector goes, there was a mix of obviously totally state-run businesses. Like I went to a wildlife park outside of Matanzas that is just definitely just owned and operated by the state, right? People get educated to learn to work with the animals, and they just go there and it just works. And then I think some of the businesses are worker cooperatives. And then there's a minority of these, or not a minority actually, because I don't know what it would be, but there is a large sector of like what would be a private business that's essentially credited and in league with the state to make the money and supply the employees and things like that.
Okay. Thanks for that explanation. I haven't heard of anybody who's like been to Cuba. That's the only reason I was interested.
It's
Uh,
uncommon for Americans, but there's a lot of Canadians there, a lot of Russians, and then tourists from Spanish speaking countries as well. So like some of them will come all the way from Spain, but many of them will be people coming from the surrounding area because it's I got to tell you, it's pretty affordable vacation. So
that would make a lot of sense.
I actually recommend it. Like maybe not if you're like a first time international traveler, but I do recommend going there. There's a lot of really fun stuff to do. It's cheap. It's very safe for tourists. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's about it.
Only gonna make the case for communism even stronger, which what I wanted to focus on with this interview was like first the Palestine situation, and then I noticed like sometimes after that's like taken care of, then it's like a few minutes of socialism.
Sure.
Before I actually like start the timer, I do want to just make sure that like you were honest about like all the answers. So I'm just gonna ask you like one question, and then um yeah, then just answer it honestly. Then we'll see what
Yeah,
happens.
sure. Oh, and just one more
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah.
What should I call you? Like, I
Oh,
didn't get your
Alex is
first name.
fine.
Alex. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, sure.
you're
Do
the
you
only
mind
person.
if, like, when we talk, right, like, if we could be a little discussion oriented, like, we could interrupt each other if we think we're getting way off track or something like
Um,
that? I don't want to be rude, but like,
if if you're fine with me interrupting you, then if you're okay
yeah,
with a good back and forth, I'm okay with that.
yeah, that's fine. I have got thick skin. I talk about this stuff all the time. I don't mind. As as long as we're not at each other's throats or whatever, if we have to call timeout, I'm cool with that. But also, if we're going way off in another direction that the other person is going to have to collect at the end of the statement, I don't mind just being interrupted.
Okay. Yeah. Plus I'm also gonna make sure that I get your full perspective in the beginning. This is what I like to do
Yeah,
in my video, so I'll give you a chance to talk too.
sure.
Um, and then I think later in the second half of the interview, I will be interrupting. And then
Yeah.
you can interrupt me, obviously. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Um, why are you why do you go to pro-Palestine rallies and protests?
because I think it's good for Americans to make their physical presence known, right? I think something about 70% of Democrats or whatever supported a ceasefire in the weeks following, the latest eruption of conflict. And I think uh, the parties aren't responsive to that kind of demand, right? That kind of opinion. So I think it's important to do demonstrations to make it obvious that many people feel that way. So it's not a question of polling, it's a question of a news story drops. There's many thousands of people have congregated to demand action from Congress, et cetera, right? Um, that should be discussed virtually everywhere, right? It should be discussed when they have the Secretary of Defense or whatever, the spokesman for the State Department or whatever, when they interview reporters and all that, they should be discussing the great numbers of people who are out on the streets. They should be discussing the American opinion, right?
So
So
like we
that
don't forget about what's going on.
they shouldn't
Okay.
forget about what's going on, and the State Department or whatever should not be and the parties, right, should not be making policy off they should not be making policy without challenge from the majority of people in their party in this case.
Challenge from the majority of people in the party, which is
I'm referring to the 70% who supported a ceasefire.
okay, okay,
This
okay.
is just Democrats. I don't know about Republicans. But
Yeah,
I
Republicans do
historically
not
I've
support us. Well, so the
yeah,
Republicans support a ceasefire on both sides, not just one side. That's what Republicans support. Um, so
sure.
so you the demonstration. Okay. And do you feel like the October 7th resistance against oppression was justified?
Do I think killing civilians or whatever is what you're getting at is justified or should be supported or
Well,
expanded?
some people don't consider them civilians. They consider them as occupiers. So whatever you
Like
believe.
who?
The majority of the pro-Palestine people that I've spoken to.
The majority that you've spoken to consider like everyone the fair game to just be straight up murdered.
Yes. Yes.
Uh,
From the river to the sea. That's what it means.
I I don't think that that is I don't know who you're talking to or I don't know what the deal is there. If I'm gonna get at your point like directly, I don't think any organization has the right to inflict terror attacks against civilians with no military objective. Do I think they have a right to attack military targets and conduct military operations against Israeli occupiers, right? The military and installations that are, you know, creating the blockade, creating the occupation, making life terrible, disenfranchising the people of Gaza. They absolutely have the right to carry out military operations against those targets.
Military operations, but not civilian targets. Hmm.
Yeah, so I like it's commonly associated with like John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, right? So John Brown and his army didn't go to Harper's Ferry to massacre civilians, right? They went to capture an armory and take weapons for their cause, right? I think that kind of action is totally appropriate. I think killing civilians um, the clouds of discussions makes things difficult to process, and I don't think it has any benefit to the movement. And I mean, quite frankly, that's what I'm mad at Israel for. So
Um, hmm. S- So just so I'm getting this correct, you're for a like free Palestine from Israeli occupation, but you're not uh really pro Hamas because their intent is to kill all the Jews. So is that
I mean, they're intent. We can talk about I assume you're referencing the 1988 charter for Hamas, right?
no, I'm referencing like after October 7th, the leader of Hamas said we're gonna kill every single one of you.
Can I get a citation on after October 7th? Because
Yeah.
it was my understanding that
that.
احنا لا نخجل من نقول ذلك بكل قوه انه صار لازم نأدبها وحنأدبها مره ثانيه وثالثه.
So now saying that they are going to continue doing what they did on October 7th. We must teach Israel a lesson and we will do it again and again. And says there will be a second and a third and a fourth.
I'm not sure what his name is, but as my understanding, the commander of Hamas came out and actually did a little bit of like a PR pivot, right? Just to be clear, I don't really have an opinion. I think this is probably not the actual internal position of people in Hamas.
Right. But I can tell you that we didn't have any intention or decision to kill the civilians.
How do you justify killing people as they sleep, families? How do you justify killing hundreds
I
of
want
people
to stop this interview.
I
want to stop this interview.
Right. But I do know that immediately following the attack, the leader was like tried to present it as a military operation that wasn't a civilian terror.
Okay, all right. So
massacre operation.
you are somebody that I wanted to interview. That's what I was looking for. I was looking for that rationalization. I like that. Well, it's not that
rationalization. Okay.
Yeah.
ندفع ثمن. نعم احنا مستعدين.
Now, that's also an important statement. Will we have to pay a price? Yes, and we are ready to pay it. Now, unfortunately, for many Gazans, Hamas is ready to pay the price. I mean, does this guy live in a 5-star hotel? He's going to be fine, right? Hamas leadership is ready to pay the price with Palestinian civilians.
Yeah. This is what I like. This is
Sure.
So I studied psychology, only a bachelor's degree, but like I've been really going deeper into it, and I've been trying to study protector parts and vulnerable parts in people. So like, and I've only started really doing this because, well, one of the reasons is like it's just to understand people better, but like anyway, it's interesting that like what you said there was very interesting to me, and I hope you were like aware of what happened there. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he did pivot. Maybe
Sorry,
he did pivot.
Could you say that again? Could you say that again? Your audio and your.
It was so I was just studying like protector parts. It's a part of IFST, internal family systems therapy, and then one thing that I noticed with like more progressive people is a part called like a denial part, and that's been very interesting to me.
Can we unpack that for a little bit, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to accuse me of denying something, right,
Yeah.
you kind of have
Yeah.
to make an argument that we're going to talk about, right?
Good,
I can't just sit here in the interview and be like, well, I'm in denial and I'm doing this psychology archetype from the family or whatever. Like that's I'm gonna need you to like actually like substantiate that.
All right, I'll give you an example. I'll
Sure.
give an example, and then I'm going to go to what you said.
Okay.
Okay. One example is almost every progressive that I know hates Trump, right? Of course, he's a racist, right?
Yes.
And I remember I was talking to my let's say my cousin's husband, and he was a Trump supporter. I was like, how could you support somebody who's racist? And he's like, are you sure he's racist? And I was like, yeah, I'm sure. So I went on Google and then I looked it up, and then I was like, Trump being racist, and then it said, and then there were like 100 articles saying that Trump is racist. I was like, okay. And then I was trying to find something racist that he said, and he didn't say anything racist. And then like I couldn't find anything that was racist. And then I asked individuals.
Isn't there a scandal with Donald Trump and about renting his properties to black people in like the 1980s and 90s? Doesn't he have he has like a lawsuit about that? I thought a discrimination case.
A discrimination case. I didn't see it, but no, I mean it's possible.
It's a Muslim ban, right? There's there's a couple things.
The Muslim ban. Well, like again, the there's a difference between banning people, like if you're, okay, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there because this is going to be a really good back and forth discussion, and this is something that I want to do, but just with the amount of time, like dude, you have no idea how much I want to have that discussion. Like this is something that I love to do.
Okay, sure. No, but let's move on then. So you said that
the denial thing about
yes, denial.
So
and like how did your uncle respond?
Oh no, he was just like, did you find any no, and then I realized that I was wrong. I couldn't find anything that racist that he said, like an overt racism. Overt racism. I couldn't find anything. And I was trying really hard. So I started asking people, like, what racist thing did he say or do? And then the two things, the one thing that comes up is the Muslim ban, right? But the Muslim ban is is just to reduce the amount of terrorism. If it was for any other reason, let's say there wasn't a lot of state-funded terrorism, right? My
Sure.
like my
State-funded terrorism from like U.S. client states like Egypt, though, it seems a bit like ridiculous to me. Like, and also like just to make like a broader point, right?
yeah.
If this constitutes denial, right, there's no racists on the planet, right? No one on Earth will, or maybe very few people, right, will tell you basically, like I'm a hardcore racist and I have no reason beyond like I think X genetic lineage is bad, right? They'll always give you a supplementary reason, right? They'll say we need to treat this group differently because they cause crime, or we need to treat this group differently because they're like a subversive national presence in our country, right? All those reasons, right? That's what makes them racist. It's not them believing it for no reason.
Okay,
That's the
so then,
constitution of their racism, right?
so what we could do is we could have no standards for like I don't like what he well one I don't know exactly if he said from the Arab world that's different than the Muslim world because there are some Muslim countries that have less terrorism
Like
than others.
Indonesia or whatever.
It's crazy they still have it, but yeah, probably less than like the Middle East, but they still have terrorism there, which isn't. But not only Muslim nations had like the Irish like bombed England and stuff. There was terrorism
Yeah,
there in Africa, like some
the
Christian
Irish were never
countries.
banned from entering the United States, right? Like,
Yeah, that's true. Well, at one point they had a good argument for not. I was doing some research on the early 1900s, and it's gonna blow. Okay, we have to stay on. Okay,
sure, yeah,
dude, I want to
yeah, no,
like
we could talk about
we
all
could
this
come
stuff,
back.
but right,
Maybe
I just want to get to the point. Like, what I want you to tell me right now is
yeah.
what do you think is obviously true that I'm denying, right? Because I can't. That's something that I can't. We can just move on. Where it's like I'm gonna say,
Okay,
yeah, I'm in
okay, I'll
denial,
tell you.
right?
I'll tell
Like,
you. I'll tell you.
yeah,
Hamas, they don't they don't have the objective only attacking military targets. They actually have the objective of killing all of the Jews, especially in Israel. And not only all the Jews, just like killing as many people in Israel as possible, because on October 7th, they killed Muslim people, they killed people from Thailand, they didn't care. They killed whoever was in
yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Israel.
but think about like what, like we when we want to take the behavior, right? We want to take the physical phenomena, and we want to find out like what explains all of the behavior the best, right?
Yes.
And I think a wanton desire to exterminate everyone doesn't really explain the behavior. I think what explains the behavior is you have an undisciplined, violent military force who's motivated like primarily by revenge in many of these cases, right? They're irregular troops who have no serious chain of command, and they're technologically behind other military forces, right? And they have no obligations internationally, right? They have no diplomatic or long-lasting interest groups around the world that are interested in depending on them, right? So as a result, they absolutely, I'll like copy
They are
this. They have a
very well funded
laissez-faire
by
attitude.
Iran. They're very well funded by Iran and the UNRWA, the EU.
UNRWA is
From
not the European Union. UNRWA is the
okay,
UN.
the UN or whatever. So
You're
okay,
saying
UN,
Hamas is funded by UNRWA.
yeah,
Could
they
you
pay for
substantiate that?
yeah, they pay for the education, the books, some
They pay for the education
supplies.
of everyone in Gaza.
Yeah.
So ergo what?
Well, what is in the books?
So if the UN, right, was educating all the people in Kosovo, is the UN funding the Kosovo Liberation Army? Will they do like war crimes or whatever? That
So the situation in okay, dude, you have no idea how much like I'm liking this discussion. I love the back and forth. Okay, let me answer to that. Gaza doesn't have a economy because of the embargo, the way Gaza would want it. Like they had a lot, their economy was a lot stronger when Israel was occupying it.
Yeah.
They left. Then there were more terror attacks, so they created the border, and then there were more terror attacks, so they had to create the embargo. And they left the occupation of Gaza because they thought that the terror attacks would stop, but they didn't.
I
So,
don't think that's actually why they left, but we don't have to get into that. We could move on.
well, they created a peace agreement because of the Intifada, right?
No, I don't think it constitutes a peace agreement. No, I think they did pull out the settlements because of the Second Intifada.
Yeah.
But I don't think they had an agreement where they said we're going to leave the settlements and then you leave us alone. I don't think that was ever discussed.
Okay, I don't know about that. Maybe you're right. Maybe you're right. But the
I
point
mean,
that
I
I'm
would appreciate like if you're going to give me maybe you're right. I don't know about that, right? Like, I mean, could you if you're saying there's a
maybe
peace
you're
agreement,
right.
that's a claim. You just have to show me the peace agreement or who talked about it or what, right? It is my knowledge that absolutely did not happen.
Okay, all right. So okay, so they had to get funding for the education.
Yeah,
Because education is usually state funded. So they have two. They have education from Ham Hamas education. They also have the um, Palestinian Authority education, and um, and UNRWA does actually do the writing for some of the books, and they're in charge of the education there. So it's a different scenario, and Gaza gets more funding. Gaza gets a separate funding for refugees than all the other refugees on the planet. So they have their own funding, and they get
sure. But
almost
how does
just
this
as much.
constitute like if you're just going to say that like any benefit to the people of Gaza, right? Any education that like the UN comes in and does, any funding they get for social services or infrastructure is de facto funding to Hamas. I think
No, no,
that's an
not all the social
extremely
services, not all the
that's
so
it.
so
But
some
education, that's what you mentioned, right?
not all the education, same with the social services. I think like 50% of it, no, not 50% of it. Us
Sure.
like the pay for slave program, like that's funded by I think the taxpayer dollars in Gaza and not like the UN or
The pay for slay is a
yeah.
bit of a ridiculous, like slanted framing, right? It's a payout for soldiers' families who die fighting, right? Basically, every military in the world does this, right? If you're a U.S. Army Marine or whatever, and you die in combat, the government will give your family, I think it's $100,000 or even more, depending on the circumstances, right?
The government, no,
Um,
I looked it up. The government doesn't give you money for killing Jews. You get extra money for
well,
killing someone who's Jewish.
that's
Yes,
not what the you're talking about. The martyrs, the
yes,
Palestinian Authority
yes,
Martyrs Fund does
yes.
not give you money. It's for people who are dead. Their families get money. They don't give you like a Call of Duty kill streak award where they're rating the amount of money to the people you killed or whatever. It has nothing to do with whether you killed anyone. It has to do with whether
do
you
a
were a
su
combatant and you died in combat, right? This is an essential service to run any military on Earth. You cannot
if you
have
do
a
a
military
suicide
force.
bombing, if you do a suicide bombing, your family gets paid.
Yes, if you do a suicide bombing, your family gets paid. If same thing that happens if you are a guard and you sit in front of a munitions depot all day, nothing ever happens, and then one day you get blown up in an airstrike, your family also gets paid,
I
right?
personally
So
feel
it has
like it would
nothing to
just
do. The funding
I,
is you got to let me finish on this. The
okay.
funding has absolutely no, I want to make it clear to your audience. The funding for the Palestinian Authority Martyrs Fund has absolutely nothing to do with killing anybody. Every soldier who could have received it could have killed no one and done nothing, and the fund would still pay out exactly the same. It has nothing to do with killing people. In the same way that the U.S. servicemen, right, when we give them $100,000, if they die in Iraq or whatever, that does not constitute giving the family money to kill Iraqis, right?
So just to be clear, you're saying that you don't the people who commit the acts, they don't if they're still alive or if they died, they don't their family doesn't get extra money if more Jews died.
Yes, that's completely correct. I don't think you could substantiate that they get any money based on killing anyone or doing any kind of violence.
So I'm gonna have to double check that.
I mean, go ahead, like
Because
look
you
it
might
up
be
right now. Like I'm
yeah.
absolutely confident in this.
Okay. I still so I would have to look it up, and if you're right that that would lean things more towards you. I am fair. I am fair. Um,
Yeah.
I still think that it would. I personally still
So,
think that it would incentivize. So okay, it would
but
still incentivize
incentivize, sure,
people.
but hold on. Like, can you just acknowledge the point that like every army on Earth has to do this in order to maintain an army, right? The United States couldn't have an army if it meant that any person who enlists is financially
Well,
jeopardizing
yes,
their
yes, but
entire
I don't want to
family, right?
talk. I don't want to talk about other armies. I understand. Not other armies do not have the intention of chopping off the breast of women in Israel.
The army has the intention of an act
They
against a
don't.
single person. I don't understand what you're saying there.
Yeah. So that okay. So I'm glad I interviewed. Okay. All right. Good. 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 Okay. Good. Good. No. 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 We're this is good. Let me just had a certain process that I want to do. Okay. Okay. I haven't, and I'm doing this late into the interview
Yeah.
because again I got into the whole talking about details. I don't like talking about details with I love talking about okay. I love talking about details if I'm with somebody and I spend a few hours with them. If I only have like 1 hour with you, then I want to do a different process. I
I
want
think these details are important. I mean, look, like, can I give you just another
yeah, sure,
like thing I want you to like chew on for a second, right?
sure.
Like France, once upon a time, was fighting wars in Algeria, right? So they can maintain control over Algeria. Associated with that war are horrific atrocities, right? Terrible. Exactly the same that Hamas or Israel does in their wars when they fight each other, right? Um, in France, you also get a similar stipend for when you're killed, right? Your family gets a similar stipend, right? Does that constitute French funding directly for war crimes in Algeria? I mean, I suppose it could, right? But I think it's totally pointless to talk about these funding mechanisms that exist everywhere on Earth, right? And then just talk about the conduct of the military itself, right? There's no reason to break apart these financial structures if they're a part and parcel to how every military on Earth functions. Like, I'm not really sure what you're suggesting the alternative is, right? Which is they have no forces at all, and
So
they're
no,
just
look,
complete
the problem is
victims.
you're
Is
right.
I
Like
think is a bit ridiculous.
the problem is you're right about about these payment structures. You're right about everything that you're saying. Like, and you're right that details are important.
Yeah,
Not only are you right, you could not be more right. And that's why I want to talk about all those things. But the way that I'm doing, okay, I'll tell you my primary goal. My primary
sure.
goal is to get the violence to stop so the Palestinians can stop dying, right? That's my primary goal with these interviews, but I want it to be done in the most peaceful way possible, which every time when I talk to leftists, they believe that a peaceful way is not possible. They believe that resistance is the key, violent
Oh,
resistance is the
correct.
key. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's
So
been shown over and over again. Yeah.
yeah.
Do I think? Can I make myself clear just real quick? Sorry,
yes.
before we get on. Do I think some kind of like conquest of Israel or whatever is how this like situation is going to be ultimately resolved? No, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't really think it's necessary. Do I think all of this hinges on key military victories that like these different groups like Hamas and Hezbollah do? No, I don't really think that this is the fulcrum that's deciding these outcomes, right? Do I think they have a right to engage in military operations against the hostile military apparatus? Yes, I do, right? In the same way that I continue. Go ahead.
I hear everything that that you're saying that okay that there has to be some form of violent resistance in order to make the voices of the disenfranchised heard, right? Is that what I'm hearing?
Um, I mean, there has to be a price associated with a military occupation, right? Um, there is naturally everywhere. It's impossible to contain. It happens, right? Every country that engages in an occupation of another, they all automatically expect this type of violent resistance because it's totally inevitable, right? Um, and I think if I'm getting your framing right, it seems like you're kind of saying they engage in these violent reprisals, right? And then the exchange back hurts the population terribly, right? Because there's like a counter strike by the opposing regime, right? And that this ultimately is bad for Palestinians, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm getting that vibe from you, right? I think that's a bit ridiculous, right? If the American Revolution didn't succeed, right? Like if George Washington and everyone was totally defeated, would he be some kind of like villain for leading all the Americans to their deaths, right? John Brown and Nat Turner, right, did not end slavery. They didn't establish any kind of territory where slavery no longer persisted, right? Um, but I think it's totally myopic, a bit ridiculous. You won't find like historians and educated people who have the belief that well, it was all kind of a crapshoot, like John Brown just got a bunch of people killed for no reason, right? Um,
It's the first
it's
time somebody
viewed
called me myopic and ridiculous, and I was actually okay with it. I don't know. I think it's the way you're saying it is like so
well,
elegant.
I'm
It's like, oh,
saying
okay,
that
okay.
like this is a it's like a one-sided analysis. You wouldn't take to any situation and say this, any other situation and say this clears, right? Like it only functions if you have basically zero investment in the project at all, and you have I think a slanted attitude towards which lives count and which um and also not to mention a totally fatalistic attitude about what everything's going to achieve, right?
Fair points. I mean, if you have a criticism of, my viewpoint about this, I can't say that you're wrong, and it would. And the point that you made about the American Revolution, where resistance is justified, I can't. I think that there are times where resistance is justified, but I also want to go over like it. It's also like important to see like so the oppressor versus oppressed dynamic is the thing that's really been interesting to me. What constitutes an oppressor and what makes somebody oppressed? So that's been that's what I've been actually like really looking into, and that's like what I want to talk to you about. Um, okay, so my intention is to stop the um the counterattacks from Israel, from the attacks that Hamas is doing, but you're saying that the attacks that Hamas is doing is justified. So that would lead to more death, but you're saying like that's justified. And so I think that's where we disagree on. So I think we need to have a common goal. We like if you're saying that you're okay with more resistance attacks, which will create more attacks from Israel, then we don't have a common goal. Like that's something that I would like to stop.
Sure. I mean, here, I'll give you an example that I think you're going to immediately see what I'm talking about, right? Like, do Ukrainians have a right to resist the Russian invasion of their country, right?
Well, they don't have the right to attack to target civilians. Ukraine
Sure,
doesn't have the right
absolutely.
to.
I agree they don't have the right to target civilians, right? I'm saying, do they have the right to have a military force conduct military operations against Russia, like in resisting the invasion, right?
Well,
Because
they
what I
they
could,
are
can
they
you give
are.
me? Well, they are, right? But
Yeah.
do you think they should just say, well, nah, well, these people, I'm leading them all to their deaths, right?
They
Because
should not they should not kill they should not target civilians, but Hamas is targeting civilians. That's it.
but this has nothing to do, like we've already established that neither of us are interested in targeting civilians. I don't think targeting civilians has anything to do with this question in the abstract, right? Because if they conducted a purely military operation against Israel, right, uh, Israel would still retaliate massively and many Palestinians would die, right? So your point still stands whether there's civilians involved or not, doesn't it?
The strikes against like I you probably noticed that the strikes that Israel has done recently are a lot harsher than anything before, and it's because this amount of civilians has never died. They like to this scale, and it's mostly because of the civilians. And they've thrown grenades and like bombs at soldiers before, but this amount of civilians is
Yeah, I
what
mean,
caused these
I just find
strikes.
this whole line of logic to be like kind of detestable, to be honest, right? Like it's like if I was taken hostage and I retaliated against the hostage taker in a way that caused him to kill other hostages or whatever, I think assigning the blame to me is pretty absurd.
Well, this is
I
what I
think if
want
I
to talk
walked out
about.
of that situation, no one would be like, oh my God, I can't believe you caused this horrible reprisal and got all my, got everyone in there killed or whatever, because I retaliated against the hostage taker. I think it's is a totally one-sided way of thinking.
Yeah, no. So like I think that me and you are just like we're just seeing Gaza differently. You're seeing it as like the fully oppressed group by the probably in the words of people who are pro-Palestine, the colonialism of Israel, right?
Yes,
Okay,
correct.
yeah. I'm just seeing it as like how do we stop the violence? And you're seeing it as okay, well, we can't stop the violence because they're being oppressed by a larger group,
That
right?
is violence, just to be clear, right? Like the blockade that exists around Gaza, right? That is violence. So I'll give you an example. There's a Turkish ship, the Mavi Marmara, which came in, tried to cross the blockade, carrying aid and relief supplies into Gaza, right? Weren't carrying weapons, weren't carrying soldiers, weren't carrying money or anything like that. They're carrying medicine and different relief supplies. And this ship was boarded by Israel, and everyone on board was killed or captured. Right? That is violence. That is going to happen whenever anyone tries to sail a ship in those territorial waters. We talk about stopping the violence, right? If there were no pitched battles again between any military units in Gaza or around Gaza, there would still be terrific violence occurring everywhere
So what
surrounding it.
bad so what bad thing would happen if Hamas did not do the attack on October 7? There was a 2-year ceasefire, right?
That's
Um,
not correct.
yeah, it's not correct because in those 2 years, Hamas sent fire balloons into Israel. So you're right. It wasn't a full
The
2 years.
incendiary balloons you're talking about are from the Second Intifada, which is a long. That's more than 2 years ago, right? And you can find, like, if you look it up right now, you can find reports of violent gunfire clashes between Israeli security forces and people in Gaza. I'm not sure
I did
what
I did
units or
look up the
whatever.
fire I did look up the fire balloon thing. It said in those 2 years, so maybe I'm wrong. Um, the
I mean, it
clashes
could have
with
been in those 2 years, right? What I'm saying is, you cannot produce for me right now like a signed uh it's a fact that there just wasn't an agreed upon ceasefire prior
so
to
this is the
any of this
second
stuff. There's
time you
still
said that there
open
wasn't
combat, right?
there wasn't an agreed upon deal. This is the second time you said that. So like and so when I look at so there
Yeah,
was
and what's
no
common between the two? There wasn't an agreed upon deal. Like, could you produce like any like could you like produce any evidence that there was like a some kind of mutually bilaterally recognized ceasefire prior to October 7th? That wasn't violated by Israel?
that wasn't oh wait, that wasn't violated by Israel. So now we're just gonna say that Israel violated something. Let me see.
No,
Israel
I'm
Hamas will
saying if
claim
there is
victory.
a ceasefire, right, and we can find evidence of Israel attacking anyway, then I don't care about the ceasefire's void, right? I don't care whether that's violated.
So that's different than
But it's
saying
my
that
understanding.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but that's
Well, it
different than
means there isn't
saying
actually one in reality, right?
okay,
Like,
no, but that's different than you saying that there was no ceasefire. So saying that there was no ceasefire and saying that there was a ceasefire, but Israel, you know, kind of just launched
I'm
rockets
sorry,
anyway.
but
Those are two
this is
different things.
ridiculous. No, I'm
How?
sorry. If me and you have a ceasefire, right? We have an agreement where we say we're not going to aggress upon each other, and then the next day I come to your house and I punch you in the face, right? What are you going to do 5 seconds later? You're going to punch me back, right?
Well, no,
You're
but
not.
you
I'm not,
said,
and I'm not.
look,
When you do that, I don't get to tell you, oh my goodness,
You see,
I
this
can't
is
believe you violated
okay,
the ceasefire, right?
Kevin,
Like,
Kevin, this is why I didn't want to do the detail route. I was trying to push you into the route where I try to understand your entire position, and then you wanted to do the details, and now we're arguing over details. Why are we
well,
doing this?
listen,
Do we
dude,
want a
these
solution or
details
not?
are absolutely critically important. If you're going to tell me, why are the Palestinians being so violent? Why is there so much terrorism? They had a ceasefire and they're doing all this stuff, right? I have to counter that. We can't have a broad conversation if we don't agree on what the facts are, right? Like,
Okay,
we
let's
could
take a
say it's
pause.
minutia and we could say it's details, right? But the premise of your question to me was that there was a ceasefire. I'm telling you there wasn't. And if we can't substantiate that, then the question is useless. Why are we even talking about it?
I personally think that there's a difference between two sides agreeing to a ceasefire and one person, and then like, so I want to see like, was there a ceasefire that was agreed upon, and then how long did it take for somebody to deny it? That's different than saying like there was no ceasefire ever, there was no agreement at all.
But
That's just what I think.
excuse me, man, that can't be your position when you came in telling me there was a ceasefire and now what?
From what I read, there was a ceasefire, and um there were no large scale military attacks against each other.
Large scale, no, but a ceasefire means you cease fire, right? Like,
Okay, so let's say okay, so what military strike happened on the side of Israel then? If it like I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this, but you're making me do this. I don't know why you're making me do this.
the bombing of the Associated Press building. What do you mean?
The bombing of the Associated Press building inside
Yeah,
Gaza.
yeah, inside Gaza. Yeah.
Why was
If
it
you're saying
bombed?
there's a ceasefire for 2 years, it could be 3 years ago. I'm not sure, but also let's be real, okay? You're the one who's making the claim that there was a ceasefire. The burden of proof is on you. If you can't substantiate that, we can't have a conversation as if it's true when you haven't established it, right? So we could say it's all details and we could say it's all this, that, or the other thing, but it's not a detail to me,
There
right?
was a ceasefire agreement where both sides declared a victory.
When?
And in 2021 after an 11-day conflict. Look, dude, I know my stuff. Could we not do this? You're gonna find whatever excuse there is to like say that I'm wrong. What's wrong? Who cares if there why is that bad if there was a ceasefire? Why is that bad? I don't understand. If there was a ceasefire agreement, why is that bad? I don't know why it's bad that they try to like not that they try to take a few days and not bomb each other. Why is that bad? I don't get
I
it.
don't think it's bad. I'm saying that there's no ceasefire that was broken by a military operation by anyone, right? That's just factually wrong. We
Okay,
can't have a
so
conversation
no,
as if it's true and it's
okay.
not.
So no, there was no ceasefire. Okay, whatever.
Sure.
Okay, fine. There's no ceasefire. There was no ceasefire at all, and now so now they've been at war
Yes,
forever. There was no ceasefire at all,
correct.
and right now Gaza is being occupied by the oppressive force, and the people of Palestine could do everything in their means to do whatever military operations they can, no matter what the ceasefire agreement, if there is one, if there isn't one, because they're being occupied, they could do what they want. Correct, right?
I think if there was a ceasefire, they should abide by it. But obviously, I
Okay,
think there was
let's
not.
okay. There's no
So,
ceasefire. It doesn't exist. No
okay,
ceasefire ever existed between them. Okay,
sure. Then
so
yes, they absolutely have a right to conduct military
all
operations.
right, good.
Yeah,
Okay,
against
all
an
right, all right.
occupying regime. I mean, who would you not give this right to, right? Like,
Okay, no,
if
I don't. No, I understand the morality behind it. Okay, all right, I
okay,
understand. Like, dude, I'm not that smart, but I do I do it. Okay,
okay,
okay. There's this occupation. No
yes,
ceasefire, and right now they could do whatever military operations that they want because they're being oppressed by this force, by this invading force, by the Israelis. Okay,
yeah.
what am I missing?
Hey, can you repeat that one more time? I'm not sure you're missing anything.
Where yeah, okay, so they're being occupied by an invading force. No
Yes,
ceasefires. It's been a war for the past 50 years, no matter what, against the Israelis. Okay, if you want to say 75 years, whatever, but Jordan and Egypt occupied those areas.
it doesn't
So
matter. Sure, yeah, yeah, yeah.
okay, all right, yeah, it doesn't matter. Just because you've been polite, I'll say 75 years.
Sure, sure, sure.
Okay, um, no ceasefire, so now there's justification for military operations. And if civilians have to die, so be it. But we both agree that targeting civilians is not going to be the best for both sides. Are we agreeing
Yes,
there?
targeting civilians is very bad. I don't think any army should do it. Yeah, I don't know how many other times. Maybe there are ways I'm going to say it.
Okay, so there's this oppressive force. Okay. So I could see how you would be, or anybody, so I could see how that you could be in a state of like, let's say, hopelessness and feeling like resistance is the only way, or
Yeah, I
violent
mean,
resistance is the only way.
in South Africa, right, they engaged in a guerrilla war against the apartheid regime. Civilians were killed, right? You mentioned earlier, right, like cutting off women's breasts or whatever. There were similar extremely horrific practices taken by the ANC during that time, right? You can look up what necklacing is. It's very gruesome. It's very terrible. Um, Ultimately, that practice had very little support. It was carried out by undisciplined actors within the, fledgling ANC that existed at that time.
Well,
I don't
since
think anyone who supports the ANC's struggle against apartheid South Africa thinks that an essential step into achieving that was necklacing people or killing civilians, right? But they do think that the ANC absolutely had a right to wage a guerrilla war against infrastructure in South Africa and the military apparatus in South Africa. This was a conscious shift in the strategy of the ANC guerrillas, right? They originally had faced lots of public backlash for war crimes that they had committed, right? And they had shifted their focus to attacking infrastructure and making it impossible for the white South Africans to maintain their apparatus of control, right? And what had came of that is when the ANC actually won, right? When apartheid had ended, it was following that and not before that we had the Truth and Reconciliation Committees, right? And even Winnie Mandela, Nelson Mandela's wife, right, who was a enthusiastic participant in these war crimes, right, was prosecuted and charged for them and punished after they had succeeded and they established their state, right? Not prior to that. So I think if we're really focused on justice for war crimes, if we're focused on creating a disciplined force that is defending, the nation of Palestine appropriately and to the standards of international law, right? That all happens after Palestinian self-determination, Palestinian sovereignty is established, whether it's some kind of two-state or one democratic state or whatever. Either one, you're not going to get any acknowledgement of war crimes. You're not going to get any prosecution, and you're not going to get any organization out of that, military milieu without, the self-determination of the groups involved, without, some concession against them, right?
and South Africa ended the apartheid because there was enough pushback, right?
Yes,
So
and then
there could
following
be
that,
there could be an argument for violent resistance because it has created, and to your Revolutionary War example, like it has worked in the past. So why not do that, right?
It's worked in many places, right? Americans, we didn't ask nicely for independence from Britain, right? We engaged in a war against them. And
Well, why didn't we ask nicely? Because the king would have said fuck off, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because they benefited from exploiting us, right? In the same way that I believe Israel benefits from exploiting Palestinians, right?
And that's wrong.
Can I substantiate one thing? You tell me if you disagree or not.
Sure.
They benefit from the exploitation of Palestinians in the sense that they are settling the territory that they live on, right? And they have a demographic problem, right? So Israel can't just say tomorrow we want to annex the West Bank because there would be a Palestinian demographic majority in Israel, right?
Yeah, and Israel doesn't want that.
Benefits by keeping them under occupation because they can continue building settlements. They can begin to, issue has been dealt with, right? They can annex the territory and take it for themselves, right? To me, that's a totally straightforward case of exploitation. It's a totally straightforward case of settler colonialism, and I'm really not sure Again, like if Russia was doing this in Ukraine or whatever, I don't think you'd have a problem like calling out what it is.
Well, I am Ukrainian. I was born in Ukraine, and I have a different opinion than other people, but like if I had to choose between giving up the Donbass and for peace, I would. If that's the only way, because I think that there's always a way to negotiate the Minsk agreement that was supposed to, if Ukraine signed it, then that could have
Yes.
pre prevented the war, I think, but
Sure. I mean, but
maybe I'm
what
wrong.
should Palestinians give up for peace, right? They should give up self-determination. They should give up national existence. They should give up
Well,
the West Bank. They should give up most of it. They should give up God. I'm really not sure what
I think
would be analogous to the Donbass, right? Would it be 10% of the country? Because I don't know.
I think that it's a conversation that should be had because maybe they shouldn't give up anything. But we still but to say that they 100% shouldn't have anything without having that they shouldn't give up anything without having a discussion about it. It's not fair because yes, the Palestinians they deserve all of the land, but we also have to see that the Jewish people did settle there. We have to look at that reality. And it's like if we do want to give back, if we want to give back 100% of the land to the Muslim majority, then it's like, well, let's talk about resettling the Jewish people somewhere. But either way, discussion has to be had about this because I think that's important to meet the needs of the oppressed group, the Palestine group. It's important to meet their needs, but I also don't see it's not just I don't see how we can meet their needs without also having a discussion about this oppressive force, the Israelis. So
I kind
it
of don't
needs to be.
understand what you're saying. So I think originally, didn't you disagree with me saying that the Palestinians were exploited by Israel?
It depends on the lens that you. I don't. I see this differently than you. I see this differently than you. Um, I see that you see the oppressor oppressed dynamic, and I see two sides that if they want, if they negotiate, peace could happen without violence if they negotiate, if they meet
Can
their
I give
needs.
you a? I'm going to do it one more time, right? You already know what I'm going to say. Could I? We're having a conversation about apartheid South Africa right now, and you say, "Oh, it's so terrible." White minority of South Africa exploits the black majority. They herd them into Bantustans, etc. Right? They conduct violent reprisals against them. It's like a two-tiered society. All of those things, right? And if I came back and said, well, I actually don't view this as a conflict of oppressor versus oppressed, I view this as two sides that need to figure out peace, right? You would say, hold on, like this both sidesing is pretty absurd, right? Like there's like a historical crime being committed here that demands unique attention, right? That's not a bilateral we just can't figure out, how to get all the nations to get along or whatever, right? There's like a very serious issue going on there. Like, wouldn't you
Okay, so
agree?
I could see how me saying that can make you think that like I'm evil. I could see that. Okay, so I'm just gonna tell you
Now,
my.
I'm not talking about evil, right? I'm
Okay.
talking about like if I told you you were imposing an oppressor oppressed dynamic upon the situation in apartheid South Africa, you would say, I'm not imposing it. There is an oppressor oppressed situation in apartheid South Africa, and you'd be right, right? So I don't think it's really a
Yes.
case of we have
Yeah.
like a subjective difference, right? I think
I
it
think there
can
is a
be
subjective
objectively
difference.
like exploitation and suppression of self-determination, disenfranchisement, occupation. These are all objective phenomena, right? You're either under military occupation or you aren't. You're either franchised or disenfranchised, right? These can
So
all be established
I think that's
objectively.
where we differ, and I'm not saying that because like I don't want this to be like because we differ on this, it doesn't mean that we can't communicate about it, and I don't want you to think like it's impossible for you to change my mind about this. It is. That's why I'm having this discussion. But I
Well, I
think
don't think it's
that
impossible. I'm asking you can you respond directly to like what I'm asking
so.
you?
I
Like,
think that the apartheid in South Africa, that was literal apartheid. I think the slavery in the United States, that was literal slavery. I think those
yeah,
two things were absolutely wrong. Um,
yeah. But
but
what
the
did no, go
yeah
ahead. I'm sorry. I shouldn't
yeah.
have interrupted.
But I just this is just my personal opinion, and this is why I'm talking to people like you. I
Yeah.
it's difficult for me to agree that what's happening in Israel is apartheid or genocide. And
Apartheid is an absolutely trivial case to make. If you want to get into that for 2 seconds, right? Desmond Tutu, like one of the great architects of the South African emancipation of apartheid, has directly called Israel an apartheid state. Even Ehud Barak, former prime minister of Israel, called it an apartheid state. And David Cameron, right, the leader of the British Tory party, was one of the first people to describe Gaza as a concentration camp.
okay,
So
sure.
I think this is hardly like some kind of like leftist orthodoxy that we have to like meet in the middle on, right? This is
Sh-
like a very commonly observed
so then this
point,
is
right?
good. So this is good that you're educating me about this, right? Isn't
Yeah.
that good?
Um, yeah, I guess I would agree. It sounds like you had a disagreement, and I want to know what that is, right? Like what?
Yeah. Okay. I'll tell you. So what you said there with the people, the guy from South Africa who was designating Israel as an apartheid state, and they know what an apartheid state is. Um, I don't. This is just my opinion, my personal opinion. And I know that you said it's objective that it is an apartheid state, and this is where it's like difficult for me. But I do want to just say this, see what you think. Um, they've uh, uh, there has to we had to have a definition of apartheid. If the definition of apartheid is that one group of people has less resources than another group of people, if that's our definition of
I don't
apartheid.
think that's apartheid. I mean,
Okay, so because one girl that I was talking to, that was her definition of apartheid. One
has
left,
resources.
yeah, one has less resources than the other one. So she was saying that, yeah,
I mean,
that
I
was
don't know
apartheid.
who you're talking to, right? But like apartheid is commonly defined as like a system of social arrangement where a majority group, I guess it doesn't necessarily have to be a majority, right? But one group exercises legal forms of discrimination and exploitation against another, and I think that is just very easily. I mean, well, let's actually look it up. Apartheid is a recognized the ICJ has a definition for apartheid um, that is used in international law, right? Uh, let's see. The implementation and maintenance of a system of legalized racial segregation in which one racial group is deprived of political and civil rights.
What would be the difference between the apartheid in South Africa and like when the United States, like before the Civil Rights Act, like after we ended slavery, like that period,
I
would
actually
that be
don't think
considered?
there's a huge difference. I think prior to 1964, Black people were discriminated against de jure, and I think it's fair to describe the United States as an apartheid state
Back then or right now?
prior to 1964.
Okay, I'm glad you said prior to 1964. Yeah, because they
Yeah,
had laws that didn't that just like you had to use a different water fountain, and then like so
it was even worse than
everything's
that. We don't have to get
segregated.
into it, but
Okay,
yeah,
okay, oh, yeah, yeah.
I would say that the United States prior, if you would agree with me that the United States prior to 1964 is an apartheid state, I think the argument for Israel is absolutely trivial. I
So
uh,
I would agree.
I
I
would
would
be
agree that.
shocked that you would agree with me on that.
Well, no, because then I think then we would be disagreeing because I do agree that prior to 1964 it was apartheid, same way as South
Sure.
Africa. But then in Israel, I just didn't see enough evidence that would
hold on. Can I take you through? This is so crazy to me. I just want to ask you two questions and we'll
All
see,
right,
right?
all right.
So in 1963, right? That's when my mom was born, not that long ago. In 1963, could black people vote, right?
Yes.
They could, right?
Yeah.
Um, in Gaza, in the West Bank, where the people are governed by Israel, like let's take the easiest case. In Area C in the West Bank, do those people who live there vote in Israeli elections?
I don't. I don't know which area are people allowed to vote. I know some
Area
areas.
C is the reason I say Area C is because that's the area that's under exclusive Israeli security control, right? So there's no Palestinian Authority security forces in Area C, right?
If you want to make an argument that there's an occupation in the West Bank, I'll agree with you there.
Sure, there is an occupation, right? Do the people part of that occupation do they vote in Israeli elections?
I don't know.
I'll tell you right now, they don't, right? Uh, they don't vote because if you included the entire population of Israel, right? If you included Gaza, the West Bank, and the de jure modern borders of Israel, right? There'd be a Palestinian demographic majority, right?
Yeah.
So if they all did vote, the system of the existence of Israel as a like a Jewish single state, right? The nation state law and things like that. This would be democratically unfeasible, right?
Yeah. Well, that's why they wanted the two-state
So
solution.
ergo, they don't vote because that's there, right? Is it? What's up?
So that's why they wanted the two-state solution. Israel wanted to have a majority of Jews, but again, they came into the land of Palestine and they wanted to have their own land. So it's like they want to have their own country. So that's a big fucking issue there.
Wait, can you rephrase that? You're saying that Israel wanted a two-state solution and that was stopped somehow?
They wanted a two states. Yeah, they wanted a two-state solution, and there was no real agreement. There was
So
no a two. There wasn't a
when
two-sided
was this?
agreement. There was
Sure, but
one.
during this hold on.
Oh,
Can I just before we go?
yeah.
During this process, right? The whole time there were settlers in the West Bank, correct?
In the West Bank, yes.
Yes. So
Well,
you don't think
yeah.
that indicates Israeli policy towards the two-state solution, right? Is that they can't be settling territory they intend to lose, right? So that indicates their posture towards the two-state solution. No, I'm pretty sure you can find. Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure you can find the tech like actual quotes from Netanyahu or whatever talking about how the settlements are there to kill the two-state solution specifically, right?
Sounds like there to kill two states.
Some of these
As
settlements
I
are strategically located such that they carve the West Bank into cantons, right? So that the settlements are located such that the West Bank is one great territorial mass, right? But when peace discussions are had, right, they take the areas of different demographic majorities typically, and they try to arrange them into a system of land swaps, right? And what the settlements are there to do is to make those land swaps and make that geographical solution unfeasible, right? Do you disagree with that?
the thing that interests me is like why there had to be settlements and why there's no agreed upon borders. I don't agree with settlements into areas that's not yours. If the Israelis, I think after 1967, Israel conquered the uh not the Gaza, the West Bank from Jordan, and it was their territory. But then I think that they gave the territory back to the Palestinians. So I didn't do enough research on exactly what happened there after 1967, which is my fault. Um,
I mean, I don't know if I would characterize the occupation as giving it back to the Palestinians, right? Because they're not under, they don't vote, they don't have security control in those territories,
So
right? I don't
yeah,
think
so
that's a fair
I'll agree.
characterization.
I'll agree with the occupation in the West Bank that they can't vote. So that could I could see how that could be apartheid. But
Sure.
what I'm looking at is like Israel. Do Muslims inside Israel have like the right to vote? Do they have equal rights? I know that.
I mean, this is a classic, right? Like I'm going to bring up South Africa again, right? Because this idea was germinated in the labs of South Africa, right? They came up with this idea, right? Where they wanted to group large black population centers in South Africa into areas they called Bantustans, right? Which were technically separate states uh, that would be under South African security control, right? But they would technically be exterior self-determining states, right? And the idea was they would take the black majority areas and they would cut them off into very small cantons, right? So they couldn't exercise any like actual power over the white regime, but none of them would technically be part of the state of South Africa. So technically, every South African citizen can vote, and they have free and fair elections between all those people. However, they systematically excluded basically all the people they didn't want to vote into these areas that are technically separate states, so they don't really have the right, right? I see the exact same thing happening in Gaza and the West Bank, where they looked at the situation and said, well, if we just gave all these people, we conquered this territory, right, as you put it, right? If we just gave all of these people the demographic rights that Arab citizens of Israel have, right, Palestinian citizens of Israel, if we gave them the right to vote like they have, then we'd have
By
no
the
country
way,
tomorrow, right?
sorry, in our past, so like at any point, like you're still gonna get the payment and everything. But I do like this discussion, so you could end it at any time you want. But I do like having this discussion,
Yeah. Do
so
you
we
want to
could
go
keep.
till you want to go till 10 o'clock maybe?
Yeah, I'm okay. Honestly, I'm okay with even a little more than that because I still want to get into like kind of solutions. I want to get your take on solutions.
Sure.
But at any point you could tell me, hey, Alex, I think that this is a
Well, I
good time.
mean, I just want to. Yeah, sure. So why don't we just wrap this up? The apartheid point, right? I think if you're willing to agree with me that the United States in 1963 is an apartheid state, I think the case for Israel's trivially made. They're
I don't
systematically
know.
excluded from or they're systematically excluded from participation in democracy, right? This is exactly the practice that happened in apartheid South Africa. If you want to argue with me that apartheid South Africa isn't apartheid, I'm not sure
South
like where what
that's
universe we're in, right? Like I'm not sure how we can have that discussion.
it well, the reason why I'm having this discussion because like for me, like I'm just looking at in that I don't know why in the state of Israel they're allowing the Muslims to have equal rights. But
Well, I
in
explained this to you.
but no, inside just Israel, but not outside. And so so I guess like what could we do to make Israel so so what you're saying is you want the out like the Gaza and the West Bank to be merged with Israel to create a one state solution so then everybody could vote in Israel. Is that what you're saying?
I don't have a strong preference. I think it's up to the Palestinians what they want as to whether they want some kind of 1967 two-state get their own country to do what they want with, or whether they want some kind of one-state democratic solution for both Jews and Arabs. I don't have a preference for either of those. I think both of them are acceptable depending on what the the details are.
Then based on what you're saying, I the inside just the country of Israel, I don't see any apartheid, but if you mix it in with the West Bank and their occupation there and the
Well,
different
sure.
rights there, then you could make an argument for then I could see
Yeah.
how it could be
But
apartheid.
this is what I just told you, right? Inside the de jure state of South Africa, what argument for apartheid is there to be made? If you include South Africa and the Bantustans, which are intentionally made to exclude them from democratic participation, then you have apartheid, right? No one talks about South Africa this way. You can't find any honest people discussing this as if you know, that's not the strategy, as if that's not the case, as if the Bantustans and whatnot are not the contents of the apartheid itself, rather than some kind of exonerating, like they're not actually part of South Africa, right? The fact is that the people who live in Gaza and the West Bank are under full Israeli security control. They're subject to Israeli laws and Israeli dictates, right? They get water and they get the passage of goods when Israel says so, not when their democracy or their state says so, right?
So do
That
you think
is
Israel
that
should
absolutely constitutes apartheid.
Okay, so do you think Israel should just pull everybody out of the West, all their people out of the West Bank and give full autonomy to the government of Palestine, make it their own country? Is that what you?
I mean, I think that's an acceptable outcome, but not only do I think that, that's the position of international law as well, right? Those settlers are illegal. They shouldn't be
They're
in the occupied territory.
I don't know if it's I don't know it depends because I don't know what agreements they had after 1967. So because Israel did conquer that territory from Jordan. So I don't know the legality
Hold
behind
on, they
that.
don't need an agreement after. But what countries in the 1960s, right? Or do you just accept conquered territories from other countries? Like, this seems like absurd to me. Like,
Well, what do you mean?
uh, you're telling me if I don't know, if some random country, if India, right, in the 60s, right, totally annexed Pakistan, right, you would just view that as a completely well, they conquered Pakistan. They get to do what they want. They get to move in their people and demographically replace them, right? I think that is bizarre. I don't think you have that. I don't think you would have that view with any other country. I think that's
Well, that's well,
a
where
privileged position towards Israel.
yeah, I you're not wrong, but where did the people of
Aren't you a
Palestine come
liberal?
from?
Like, do you believe in like conquest? Like,
I don't believe in conquest, but I also think that people on the left they only criticize um like white colonialism, but when it comes to Muslim colonialism, they don't really say anything. They don't have a problem with it.
well,
So, for
fine. I mean,
example,
then we could take that, right? And you could accuse me of being a hypocrite, but it doesn't. Then you'd be wrong about Israel being an apartheid or a colonist state, right? I don't think you want to bite that bullet, right?
I I don't know that's look of confusion because it's like defeat or whatever. I'm trying to find a way, like if I'm talking to like somebody like you, and I've mentioned a few times that like how do we find a peaceful solution? And it seems like you don't want.
I think this. I'm sorry. I'm gonna be honest with you. I think this is concern trolling. Think we're having like a discussion about the facts of the case, right? And I think
All
we
right,
get
okay,
to a
okay.
couple. Hold
So
on. Can you let me finish this? Just
okay,
when we get to a point where we're starting to rub up against like a factual conflict, like I'll give you an ultimatum or I'll give you a demand, right? It looks like we're just walking all the way back to, well, at the end of the day, I just want to find a solution. I just want to do this, right? And I feel like this is being used to dodge basically everything I'm telling you.
I'm agreeing with a
And
lot of the stuff that you're saying.
it's pure insinuation that I don't want a solution, right? Like I just don't know why this is real.
Okay, okay, that wasn't fair to me. That wasn't fair of me.
Okay,
That wasn't fair for me to do that to you.
sure.
So sorry about that. Um, yeah, so we're still talking about like the oppression and not what to. Okay, okay. Why did you why did you even choose to have this discussion anyway? Was it because
I
you
don't
feel
know.
like
I like talking about this stuff.
okay? I like
And
that.
I'm gonna be honest. I looked before I did this. I watched two videos on your channel, and I thought your interlocutors um, I don't know. I thought there was a lot of stuff being discussed. It's one of those things where you want to like jump into the screen and say like, hey, like what um the answer, what should be talked about here is obvious, right? I want to jump in and say, hold on, like in 1982 Israel did this or whatever.
Well,
When
you
that's
are
not
more
being voiced by our
difficult.
guest. I had the link sent to me by one of my buddies. I love to talk through and discourse and debate these types of issues. So I
Mhm.
figured I would respond and chat about it. I don't know.
You were on par with one of the girls that I talked to, the one who said that apartheid is like when there is a difference in resources. Your debating skills are like up there with her. In fact, it's a little more because like you actually are able to like interrupt and like you know like all the facts and like you're very sharp too, with especially with the language that you use.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I am impressed. Um, I just don't. Everybody that I'm speaking to is saying that there's the apartheid. Okay. If
And I mean, just to be clear, right? We just had a lengthy discussion on the apartheid, and I don't think I got a satisfactory response from you on
okay,
why the
what's your
U.S. in 1963 is apartheid, but Israel today isn't, right? We went over, you said the Gaza and the West Bank, they're technically not part of Israel, right?
I
And
think that's
then,
why.
well, exactly. And then I told you that the Bantu stands in South Africa, that was the constitution of apartheid. Those people weren't technically part of South Africa. So is apartheid South Africa? Not apartheid, right? This is what I want a response for you on.
They were so I didn't know about the Bantu stands and how they're not part of so after that they got what reunified or because I didn't do the research on that.
Yeah, so the Bantu stands were briefly recognized by the apartheid regime. Um, I think between World War II and the 90s, Bantu stands no longer exist in South Africa. Today, South Africa is a multi-racial democracy. Um,
Oh, mm. Then I could say that
I can give you another
based.
example that's closer to home, right? In the United States, we put the Indians on reservations, right?
Okay, there it is. Yeah, I changed my Wi-Fi just in case.
Sorry, that was probably my fault. Would you mind also when we're done, would you mind sending me the recording?
Yeah. I'm gonna be very reluctant to post this on my channel because I think I'm not gonna say you got me, but there were a few times where I was like, what do I do here? But I'm gonna have to put it up because I have to, yeah, show some kind of integrity. So yeah, I'll be able to. I'll try to find a way to send it to you.
Okay. Do you mind if I record on my end for this half then?
Uh, yeah, sure. Might not be a good idea, but on my part. But then again, it's like then that would mean I'm hiding something, which is not good either. So I would have to take a look at myself. Um, okay. So you were talking about the Bantu stands, and how those no longer exist,
Yes.
and that
So
was your
the
example.
the destruction of the Bantu stands, the granting of those people the right to vote, etc., right? That was the physical dissolution of apartheid, right?
Okay.
When like for example, when Andrew Jackson, right, various United States regimes, right, sent many of the Indians to Oklahoma, they lived in sovereign Indian territory where they were not granted the right to vote in United States elections, right?
Okay.
That was certainly apartheid.
Yeah. Okay. I'll 100% agree there also. Yeah.
So
So why am I resisting to this? Why am I resisting to that? Okay, maybe okay. Let me say that you did change my mind a little bit, leaning more towards if you include the West Bank, then Israel is an apartheid state, right? Um, I'll I'll get I think that you did a good job of explaining that. Um, yeah. So I'll tell you where my resistance comes from, and it was about the formulation of Israel. About damn, but then I'm just like then I'd be acting like a coward by let me see. I guess I see Israel differently morally than the United States and South Africa. And the reason is who colonized South Africa? Was it the Dutch, right? Or was it the Dutch? I think it was the Dutch.
Um, I mean, it depends, right? Like the Dutch showed up first, and the British showed up later. In fact, the first usage of the word of the term concentration camps, right, comes from the British in the Boer War, imprisoning not the black people of South Africa, probably many of them, but the primarily the Dutch.
You were one educated motherfucker. All right.
Well, you said you
The
wanted to speak to about this kind of stuff, right? Like,
no,
so I'm here, right? You know.
yeah, I like learning new things. And the United States too, they've colonized other islands and nations as well. Um, I just see Israel like as like a little different. Maybe I'm biased, but
Well, I mean,
because
that's what I'm
they
saying, right? Is you have special privilege for Israel, right? Like, I'm getting you to commit to definitions that you agree with on third party countries, and then you sit here and tell me, well, it's just because it's Israel, it can't be, right?
well, no,
Um,
Israel, like again, as I said, Israel, if you just take the state of Israel, I don't see it as a apartheid country. But if you add in the West Bank and you add that settlement part, which is the South African argument that you gave, then yes, I
yes.
do see it as an
Well,
then
if you
then
add
then it
in,
would.
right, it's kind of like saying, like, I don't think the U.S. is an apartheid state. Like, white people were voting just fine in 1962, right? Or white people had perfect rights or whatever. But if you add in the South, if you add in black people, then it is an apartheid state. But of course, apart from that, Mrs. Lincoln, how is the play? Like,
But I'm just telling you where I just see it like a little differently. And it was in the country that like the other reservations where like you couldn't vote, like the Indian reservations. If you put them in a certain area, then you say you can't vote. Then I would see that as apartheid. Or same way what China's doing with the Muslim population, or just putting them into camps and stuff in their own country. Then I could also see it there. But
I
if
mean,
like
if you're willing to do for the Uyghurs like vote.
they both. Oh shit. Fuck. Okay. So they're put in camps and
Like,
they're
uh,
sterilized, but they could vote. That's interesting.
Xinjiang like is not like under military occupation, right? Like, there's no checkpoints like there are in the West Bank. There's no they're not conducting military raids into Xinjiang or whatever. I think the case is like very trivial. Like, if you would accept Xinjiang as an apartheid situation, then again, I think the case for Israel is totally trivial. If you would accept the United States in 1963 as an apartheid situation, I think the case is completely trivial. I mean, even South Africa, right? I also think that case is trivial, right? But the fact is that everyone knows the South African regime was more brutal than Jim Crow laws, right? But if we're willing to admit that as that constitutes apartheid, then like I
So
don't
why
know, man. Like,
so why can't I agree that Israel would be an apartheid state? Why can't I agree with that? Okay. I think I know I can't agree with it because the so the Dutch came in, they colonized the area, they created their own laws, but I think the way that the is I think it's I don't know why the hell I'm so biased about this. I think it's because when the Jewish people came in, they had no states. The Dutch, they had a state. The United States, they had a country. But the Israelis, the Jewish people, they had no country. They had to go somewhere. I don't know why the fuck they chose. Well, I know why they chose Palestine, the land of
yeah,
Palestine.
okay,
It was a stupid decision. I don't know why.
sure.
I don't know why they would do that. But I think so. They didn't have a state, and they decided to go to that land of Palestine, especially because it was colonized by the Ottoman Turks, and then the British colonized it. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I'm not entirely sure I would describe the Ottoman situation as colonialism because it's not like they're moving Turks into Palestine to try to like Turkify Palestine. They had a relationship with Palestine like the way medieval vassals and like feudal systems worked, I don't think that's the same thing as colonialism. The British colonized Palestine. Yeah, also probably. I think that's makes sense. And then
Because British had boots on the ground,
the
right?
Zionists colonizing, I think is absolute certainty. Yeah. But you mentioned so they don't have a state, right? That would be an argument for why they get to do apartheid, or why you might agree with them doing apartheid in that situation. But the statedness of the people involved can't be the crux of why it's an apartheid, right? Like whether it's an apartheid as to whether the people have a state or not, you know? Like Boers, like the people in South Africa, right, aren't straightforwardly just Dutch and the Netherlands is their country, right? They speak Afrikaans. They don't speak Dutch necessarily, right? Did those people have? Should they all have just screwed off back to the Netherlands or whatever? I'm not really sure what you're suggesting. Like they didn't really have a state either outside of the one that they were occupying, right?
Wait, who didn't? The Boers?
The Boers,
Oh,
yeah.
I mean, they all came from. So what should the Jews have done? That's a good now that's interesting. What should the Jews
I
have done after
Do
World
you
War
want to know
II?
what I think? I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, I think the United States of America should have let them in, and we chose not to. We should have had accepted them as refugees. I
Well, we
think
didn't
Joe
like
Biden
Jews
said something to the
either.
tune of, "If Israel doesn't exist, no Jew in the world is safe." Right? Are they not safe in the United States today? Like in New York, as many Jews live in New York as they do in Israel. Right?
Well, there's still a lot of well that's what happens. There is like a genocide of the Jews and then they go somewhere else and then everything is safe for like 50 or 100 years and then there's another then when the economy goes down like what you saw in Germany or what you saw whenever there's troubles they always blame the
Yeah.
Jews. And even right now it's like they're like there's a lot of discrimination against Jews even though it's like they're not Israeli, they're just Jews
In
living
the
in.
United States,
Yeah, I live in New York City. Yeah, there's crazy
I live in New
discrimination.
York too. What's the
Yeah,
discrimination against Jews in New York?
I don't know. I think that if you burn down a pride flag, you're going to be arrested with a hate crime. But here, people tear down the Jewish flags. People have been yelling at Jews in their face. And yeah, that sounds like discrimination if you're yelling at somebody because,
What
they're,
group of people it doesn't get yelled at in New York?
but not I've never, for being Jewish, I've seen like, I've seen more videos recently and that sounds like discrimination to me. It's like saying
Oh,
if black
but
people
hold on.
do,
Like, so this is wild to me, right? Because
yeah.
let's look at a tale of two. Like, let's look at a tale of two Jews, right? In 1948, one of them moves to New York City, and one of them moves to Palestine. Which one do you think is safer overall for the next rest of their life?
Wait, you said one to Palestine, one to where?
It's one to the United States,
Oh, the United States.
of course. So what's the argument? They need Israel to be safe, and they're not as safe there as they are in the United States.
Well, in the United States, they are
So,
actually very safe, and even in New
yes.
York, even with like the hate crimes against Jews, it's like one of the highest. I think it's like blacks, Jews, and Asians. If you count Jews aren't a race, whatever. If you want to count
Yeah,
the
I mean,
religion
I'm
as
willing
yeah,
to accept that there are absolutely hate crimes that are perpetrated against Jews on the basis of them being Jewish in New York and in the United States, right? What
yeah.
I'm telling you is, I don't understand what if you're saying like what Joe Biden said, right? They're not safe without a state of their own, and they have the justification to do whatever in order to achieve that, right?
Well, I don't believe
And
that
they're
they have a
not safe anyway
justification.
with
I
that
don't believe.
state, right? And
Well,
they're
well,
safer in the United States. Like
well,
I'm not really sure like what's your argument?
well, that's the thing. I don't think that they have the justification to do whatever.
Yeah.
I guess the thing that what I'm thinking about is like the United States wasn't exactly like non-discriminatory. It was pretty safe for the Jews, but yeah, again, they are one of the most discriminated people in the United States. And early in like the 19 like 60s and 70s, there were prejudicial practices like against the Jews for like going into like certain universities and stuff. They had certain quotas that they it was very difficult for like you had to have higher standards to get in
But
to the
what's the
universities.
point of this if
Well,
it's
I
not the
guess I'm saying,
justification for colonizing? Isn't it what you brought it up
well,
originally,
no, no,
right?
it's
Is it's
not
not
a,
colonialism or something because not apartheid because they don't have a state anywhere, right? Like,
I
and then
guess
I said, why do you need a state? And you said because they need to be safe from all this stuff. That's the
well, we
fundamental
can't
justification,
say,
right?
well, it's not just it's not justification for for them going into Palestine instead of like the United States. I don't know if I would say that, but I think we could agree that the Jews, they just want to feel safe, and we had to find a way where they could feel safe um without colonizing, right? So it's like
Yeah,
what
and
could
I
they
mean, I
have done?
told you very straightforwardly, right? The United States denied the entry of many Jews in the 20th century, who were fleeing, racialized violence and pogroms or whatever. I think that the policy should have been the opposite. I think the United States should have been a place of amnesty for those people, and we wouldn't have to deal with this. There'd be no colonialism necessary, right?
I agree. I agree, but Americans were pretty racist towards Jews also. Yes, they were safer in the United States than most other places, but there was still racism. Well, I don't. Let's use the word racism, because I
But
know it's
what's the
relative.
point, right? So there's an expression in Italian, right? It's called che vuoi, right? It's when you say something and you say, I know what you're saying, but what are you trying to tell me by saying it, right?
It's funny. Usually, I'm the one telling people that. I've never been on the other end of that.
Um,
I'm trying to say it in a way.
like I know what you're trying to say, but what are you trying to communicate to me by saying they're unsafe in America? What's the point?
So I guess what would have been what would have been the other solution for the Jews? Where should they have went if the United States didn't really take them in? And then there was the British mandate for Palestine, and then the Jews were like, okay, I want to go there. Well, that was in the
If we're
1917.
talking
That
about
was
where
in
should they
1917.
have gone and it's a question of safety, they
Yeah.
factually were unsafe going to where they did go, right? So I don't understand.
No, they were actually
They were
safer.
not.
No, they because no, they were safer in Israel compared to everything that's happened in Europe.
They're safer in Israel in 1948 than they would be in the United Kingdom.
Then like all their experiences in Europe? Yes.
All their experiences in Europe, right? Were
Yes.
like
What do you
it
disagree
seems
with?
like totally absurd to me, right?
What
Like
do you disagree with? What do you
you're
disagree with?
you're it, you're almost like reverse cherry picking, right? You're like where would they have been safe except for don't say any of the places where they would have been safe, right? Obviously I can't answer that. That's a ridiculous unfair prompt, right?
I guess I try to see everybody's perspective, but I also would like for you to see the perspective of the Jewish people.
I mean, can I put this a second way for you, right?
Sure.
Are you familiar with Romani people?
No.
They're called gypsies, right?
Okay.
Pejoratively, are you
Yeah,
familiar
yeah.
with this? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pejorative.
So
Oh, okay, okay. That's why I didn't know it. Okay.
no, I don't. We could. It's okay. Uh, there's no gypsy state on Earth, right? There's no Romani country, right?
Hmm.
Romani are discriminated against virtually everywhere they go in
Yes.
Europe, right? All that's the case, right? So where do they get to put their state? Like what? I'm Romani, right? I want you to see it. I'm not actually, right? But if imagine I am, and I want you to see it from my perspective, right? And I'm saying we need a homeland. I'm going to make it actually right here in New York City, right? I'm going to get the global Romani population to move here, and we're going to declare an independent separatist state in
That's a good point. That's a good
um
point. I think that's the best point that you made so far. This was the point where I was like, oh shit, maybe I'm wrong. This was that point. Like the way that the some of the Zionists rationalize it is that the Jewish people, they did have a state, like 2,000 years ago, I don't see that as a valid argument because it was 2,000
Yeah,
years
it
ago.
was 2,000 years ago. Also, I'm going to be honest, like monarchies and things like that, that far in the past are not states. They're people's personal property and things like that. That I don't think it's reasonable to describe them as states that embody national self-determination, right? That doesn't happen until much later in history.
Am I the bad guy? What do you think? That's a good point with the Romani people, the gypsies. I'm sorry, I've known them as
No,
gypsies.
it's
I'm sorry.
I have no problem with it. I
Okay.
don't know what they want to be called or what this. I've heard it both ways. Don't worry about that. I'm not gonna police your language or anything.
That's a good point. So like let's say the gypsies they do let's say they amass enough people they do want to feel safe. Does that give them justification to take a land? Do you
Yeah.
how do you know how the Jewish people settled in the land of Palestine? Are you familiar with that
Yeah, they
history?
purchased well the very first groups, right? Purchased land from absentee Turkish landlords in Palestine. And then the second group was they had a cutout in 1920, the Balfour Declaration, that was arranged for them to buy uh, land and begin emigrating in Palestine, right? Just to be absolutely clear before we go any further, right? When I say buy land from absentee Turkish landlords or from the British system or whatever, this practice isn't fair, right? I don't have the right to sell my neighbor's house. That was essentially what was going on, right? The Turkish landlords, I don't think, uh, like if we were all peasants, right, and my landlord sold my farm to some other group and kicked me off of it, right? I think that's bad, even though it's technically a fair commercial exchange, right, in the context of that society.
Yeah, I could say that it's legal, but it's not fair. Yes.
Yeah, it's legal, but it's totally unfair because there were feudal social relations happening in the Ottoman Empire at that time, right? It wasn't free people engaging in free commerce, right? There were feudal landlords and stuff like that who were absentee and who were selling it, right? On behalf, kicking out other people. So, I mean, that's how they got there, right? And if we just want to be like purely definitional, right? The funds that they would use to pool money in order to do this were openly called like colonial funds. And I think the first bank in Israel was the first colonial bank. I believe that's what it was called. So they were very open about the buying this land being a practice of colonialism that was known to them at the time.
I'm actually really glad that we talked. You've like I think there were a few times where I was like I'm not sure I was thought to verify some of the validity of what you said,
Yeah.
but you did make up some pretty good points because now I am seeing that okay, based on like the definitions that we're giving, there is an apartheid state, and usually I would say that just to get the other person to kind of shut up, so then I could get to what I actually want to say. Um, but I could see that the Jews coming in, even though it was legally, it was not fair. So why do you think it was the Muslims who attacked the Jews coming in and not the Christians?
Was the Zionists, right? Not Jews in the abstract, right? But like Zionists were attempting
We could say
to
Zion. We could say Zionist Jews.
yeah, sure, yeah.
Okay.
The Zionists were attempting to break away a state that included many of those people, right? That would have disenfranchised them. So, like in our example, right, the Romani people, if they tried to break away, like I live in the East Village, right? If they
Hmm.
tried to break away the East Village from being part of America, right, I would resist that because I don't want to be part of the Romani state. I want to be represented by, a multicultural American state, right?
So yeah, I was talking to my brother. He's more educated than me about this. Like because he really likes the details, and then I was like, yeah, the Jews came in legally, and then it's like, yeah, but the Zionist Jews, they wanted to create their own state in that land of Palestine, and then that's when the Muslims they started getting upset about it. But I guess
And just to
why?
be clear, like the Christians, like we say the Muslims or whatever, like the many Palestinian Christians have opposed Zionism from the beginning, for the exact same reason. They don't want to be part of a state that is privileges and prioritizes one ethno-religious group over another. I don't think anyone wants to be part of a state like that unless they're in the majority, or not the majority, unless they're in the privileged group, right?
The Muslims in Israel are doing pretty well. They're not part of the majority group, but they have equal rights, and they have more freedoms than anywhere else in the Arab world.
That's not true.
Well, okay, which Arab nation do you feel
Uh,
like they might have more, like
Lebanon,
like woman rights maybe?
Lebanon.
Yeah, well, yeah, okay, that's a good point, but it's a
There's
Christian.
no Sharia law in Lebanon. There's no hijab laws in Lebanon. There's no women can't not drive like in Saudi Arabia or whatever. It's a I don't see.
It used to be a Christian majority. It's not a Christian majority anymore, but it still
Yeah,
has the highest or one of the highest Christian. It has one of the highest Christian majorities in all of the Middle East, and that's one of the main reasons because it's not dominated by a Muslim majority. But it's a good point. It is a good point.
yeah.
So you could, yeah, they in Lebanon, yeah, it's not a bad point. Um, okay, so okay, so Israel's an apartheid state. It has colonized that land through means that were legal but unfair.
By both
The
legal and extra legal means, right? So some of it involved terrorist attacks to get people to flee their land, and some of it didn't in the Nakba in 1948, right? Famously involved pushing 700,000 people off their lands by military force, right?
Nakba. Do you think the Nakba would have happened? Did the Nakba happen after the Arab League invaded or before?
It was before.
Okay. The
What's the
so
justification for the Arab League invading if there's no declaration of like how could that even possibly be the case?
Well, from what I heard, you could tell me if this is correct or not. The
Sure.
Arab League let the Muslim population in Palestine know that they were invading, and they told them to flee. And then once they killed everybody who was left, then they would give the property back to all those who fled.
All that happens after the declaration of the state there, right? So the
Yeah,
promise to
yeah,
the Arab League
yeah.
was they're not allowed to declare the state. I think you'd probably agree with me. In 1948, the case for declaring a like uni-religious state there or whatever is extremely slim. And I think the Arab League had a normal reaction to that. And yeah, the Nakba predates the violence by the Arab League. Absolutely. I actually don't think the Arab League existed at that time. I think it was individual countries intervened one by one. I think the Arab League was a creation of the Cold War, but I could be wrong about that.
Well, it was 5 to 7 Arab countries, but I forgot. I think it was called the Arab League. Um,
Sure.
but
But yeah,
but I know there were definitely cases. I've heard the for like the testimony of people who have been actually, like, they've watched their family get killed by the Jews during the Nakba, and they were forced to be kicked out. But from what I read from the history, Egypt and the other Arab nations, they did tell the Muslims to leave because they're going to invade. So I think both could be true, and it's not just that some of them fled
I mean,
willingly.
we can mince words about like what caused 700,000 people to leave Palestine, right? And we could say, was it the command by the Arab League that caused everyone to just up and leave? But that doesn't change anything about the evidence of the numerous massacres and forced expulsions that took place at that time. Like, did the people in Deir Yassin like clearly did not get the memo to leave, right? Or if they did, it wasn't taken seriously because they stayed there and they were killed or expelled at gunpoint.
Yeah, I think getting forcibly removing anybody through violence, even during even if it's a time of war, that should not happen. Um, what do you think about after 1948, like the hundreds of thousands of Jews, like in all the other in the other Arab nations, like Egypt, Syria, who were kind of like forced to leave? Do you feel because of the state
Yeah,
of
I mean,
Israel being created?
uh, I don't think Palestine should be held responsible for the actions of those Arab states, but I also want to add that many of the Jews left there because of uh, false flag terrorist attacks that were committed by the Zionists in those countries specifically to motivate Jewish immigration, right? So you can look into the Lavon affair. I don't know if you've heard this before, but it was a campaign of false flag terror attacks by the Zionists in countries like Iraq in order to motivate the Jewish population in Iraq to leave because, again, they had a huge demographic problem in Israel until the Mizrahi had migrated from other. I mean, they still have the problem, right? But it was a massive priority of them to promote uh, immigration from that part of the world.
So I have no choice but to like agree with that because of, like, it's new evidence and I can't say that what you're saying is wrong, so I have to agree with it.
Yeah, I mean, we
Um,
could say the most you could say is that the scope of right, like the scope of the attacks in the Lavon affair doesn't justify the number of Jews that had left, right? We
that's what I was
can
getting at. Yeah. So
certainly we
both
could.
could be true. I guess that's
Oh,
what I'm trying to
well,
say.
what I'm going to say is it doesn't matter, right? Like, I'm not here as a spokesman of the Jordanian monarchy from 1948. I'm not. I don't go to rallies supporting the Khedivate in Egypt, right? Um, I am interested in Palestinian self-determination, right? So I don't really think I have to answer for the political activities of the entire like
No, you
religion
don't have
or
to. You don't
yeah.
have to. I was just curious. It's not in a way of saying like, well, why don't you care about these? I was just curious, you know.
Oh, sure. Well, that's my position on it. Then I think many of those people probably were kicked out unfairly. Many of them simply wanted to move to a country where they had a privileged position, and some of them were driven out by false flag terrorist attacks by Israel. So um, I just don't think it's comparable to the Nakba.
No, it's not. Well, it's comparable. Is it comparable? Well, I think it's comparable. I think that
They were
uh
driven out at gunpoint in Iraq.
well, I think in like Syria they were taking away their right to vote. They weren't allowed to leave the country. In like I think Iraq and Syria they were mistreated. There were some pogroms and killings of the Jews. They were given less rights because Israel created the state, so so hundreds of thousands of Jews were being mistreated, and that's why they like all left because the hatred towards them was just too much. We could add in that that there were the false flags, and what happened with the Nakba was, you know, terrible because again nobody should be forced off their land at gunpoint. But we could equally say that the way that the Arab states treated the Jews who were not part of Israel wasn't fair,
I just don't
and it
understand
pushed
why
them
that's
out.
relevant. Of course, I agree it's unfair, right? Like, I don't, I'm not a cheerleader for any like historical Middle Eastern regimes, right? Many of these regimes were collaborators with exterior empires, right? So the Jordanian monarchy and Iraq, the Hashemites, right? They were closely linked to the British Empire until like, I guess recently. I don't know. I don't view these states as like champions of Palestinian self-determination or anything like that, and I'm not. I just don't think it's relevant.
Okay, they're not a champion of Palestinian self-determination like you.
Like me, I don't know about like me. I mean, I'm
You're
willing
not
to
a
talk to
champion.
you about it, right? And I I completely do support it, right? But a champion, right? I'm not sure if that's appropriate.
I don't know. You're going to protest and stuff, so you're doing good work, right? You're
Yeah, I
doing
make
the
some phone calls to Congress people and stuff like that.
all right, not bad. And I think that's the thing that I respect the most about you people who do these protests. Like, yeah, maybe I disagree with a lot of your ideology. Well, I don't want to say ideology, some of your beliefs, but yeah.
Sure.
So okay, so based on what we're saying, Israel's an apartheid state, and they colonized it,
Yes.
and now there is justified violent resistance. Okay,
Correct.
okay. To what end, I guess is what I'm okay.
Exactly the end I established when we first started our conversation. Military operations against infrastructure and military targets and military personnel, the apparatus of violence and oppression that affects them, absolutely, like any other people, like the United States way back when, like the ANC in South Africa, right? All of the situations, they have the same rights. To what end do they not get to oppose it? I'm not sure because I don't think massacring civilians or whatever constitutes any opposition to the oppressive structure or whatever. So I
Oh
wouldn't present that as a
wait.
limit on. I wouldn't present that as a limit on what they're allowed to do to oppose them. I don't think it opposes them in a meaningful way, right?
Wait, what's that thing that you just said? There was no
So what I'm
you
telling you, right, is not that they're allowed to go this far and they can't go any further, right? I'm disputing that killing or massacring civilians is going further or is going too far. I think it's unrelated, and I think it's just not appropriate.
okay, so let's say the resistance you continue to support the resistance, and the books in Gaza continues to support it, and Iran continues to support it, and a lot like the
Yeah,
citizens of Jordan, like everybody continues to support the
and
violent
Yemen, yeah.
resistance. And Yemen, okay. So let's say everybody continues to support it. There has to be a goal, I guess, right? I would hope so.
Um, I mean, does each operation have to include some kind of like maximalist goal or
Yeah,
whatever? I don't.
because then you're destroying military targets just because, and then your civilians are going to keep getting.
There's no such thing as if you're under military occupation. There's no such thing as destroying military targets just because
Well,
they
there has to be
are
a
the
goal.
occupation. You are dismantling the occupation by destroying them.
Okay, but there has to be a goal, right? I
Yes,
would
the
assume
goal
maybe.
is that there is an apparatus of military occupation of oppression, right? That you are destroying, so it can't do that anymore, right? That's what they're trying to do. Like, yeah, I don't know any other way to say it.
So they're trying to destroy Israelis' capacity to operate militarily. Like that would be the
Uh,
goal.
a capacity to operate militarily, or in the West Bank, right? It might be their capacity to maintain and secure settlements.
I I would personally like to focus on Gaza.
Sure, we
And
could
then we
focus on
could.
Gaza. Then, yeah, certainly. I think they, if when they're attacking the walls, they're attacking the bases there, right? Like that's an assault on the blockade and the containment policy they have against them, right? Like that's the end in itself. Asking what the long-term political goal of any military operation is, it's sometimes irrelevant, but obviously many military operations, their goal is simply to accomplish the text of the operation, to destroy X piece of infrastructure or defeat X unit of soldiers or whatever, or capture some area of territory or whatever. That's the justification.
But wouldn't like a goal that the people of Gaza would want to have is, freeing Palestine from the river to the sea, Wouldn't that be like a goal that they have? Taking back all
Um,
of their land? Because there is the occupation, so wouldn't they want to take all the land back until there is no occupation?
yeah, I think so.
Okay. So since there is an occupation,
Yes.
then they must take the land back, and it seems like violent means is the only way.
Um, I don't think violent means are the only way, but I think it's I don't exclude those means, and they do have results, right? You told me in the second Intifada they pulled out the settlements from Gaza, right? They
They
were in
did.
an they were in an active they were engaged in an active policy of ethnic replacement and settlement. They did conducted, I guess in this case, right, somewhat childish, right, guerrilla military operations, and then they revoked that policy. So I can't see that as anything. Like I think you're coming from this perspective of they're fighting, but they're not getting anything, and I don't think that's true
No,
at all.
no, I said, well, one, I wouldn't describe the Intifadas as childish guerrilla operations, because
I'm saying the incendiary balloons and whatnot are not comparable to like
well, I
sophisticated.
was talking about, I guess when I think of the Intifada, I think about like the bus bombings and like yeah, like when a suicide bomber goes off and like
Yes,
bunch of
that
people
what
die.
I'm telling you is those are not sophisticated military operations. Those
Yeah, but they
those are
still,
terrorist
but
attacks.
even if they're not sophisticated sophisticated military operations, even then, it was still part of the Intifada. A lot of people died, but I see what you're saying. I'm not
Yeah.
disagreeing that it was still. Um, um, where was I going at? Oh yeah. So you were saying that you feel like I believe that these military actions they're not gonna help. And but yeah, as I said before, the second with the Intifada, they forced Israel to decolonize, I guess, the part of
They removed the
God.
settlements from
Yeah,
Gaza. That's
they
correct.
removed the
Yeah.
settle. Okay, they removed the settlement and the occupation until they
The
put up the
occupation
embargo
did not end in 2006. They pulled out the settlements.
and the military.
They pulled out the military from the interior of Gaza, right? But they maintain total security control of Gaza to this day, right? I don't think
Yes,
that's kind of a
yes.
silly way to be like, well, we ended the occupation, but no ship gets in or out without our say so, and no one goes through without showing their papers to us, right? At gunpoint or whatever. That's I consider that occupation. I think you'd have a very hard time, like I don't know, convincing the UN or something that wasn't occupation.
Okay, we could agree that they pulled out the troops and civilians, but they're still
Yeah,
occupying it through the border and embargo.
yeah,
Um, um, so it worked there, but the
yes,
violence, I guess, hasn't stopped. And we knew it wasn't gonna, we this wasn't a
yes,
surprise to anybody. We knew that even though the violence has like gotten a little less, like we knew like this conflict wasn't going to end because
yeah,
they're still the colonizing force, and there's still um Palestine, which is
correct.
going to keep doing their violent resistance and their terror
Yeah,
attacks. Um,
correct.
so like that's why I was asking about like what's the goal? If the goal was to get rid of the um, heart of the occupation in Gaza, it worked.
I mean, the
Um,
goal, as with any guerrilla war, right, is to like guerrilla wars. They don't hold territory and replace the state or whatever. The goal is to make these various occupations as expensive and politically untenable as possible, right? So every attack contributes to that. It's very difficult to justify any particular military operation if these uh, types of conflicts, but you can justify the entirety quite easily, right? So I'll give you an example. The FLN in Algeria resisting French colonialism, right? Um, is any particular strike that they do against the French security apparatus or French settlements or whatever, is that going to bring down the French system? No. Is it going to bring French reprisals against the Algerians and cause people, including the civilians, to get killed? Absolutely, right? Would anyone say that this hazard means that the Algerians just have to live under French rule for as long as the French decide? No. Would anyone say that this disempowers the ability, disempowers the, excuse me, would anyone say this disqualifies the Algerians from engaging in violent resistance against French colonialism? No.
trying to. Hmm.
like the Boston Tea Party, right? Or they tarred and feathered a bunch of people, right? What did that actually accomplish? Did following the Boston Tea Party, did the British government remove the tariff on tea, right? Did they franchise the Americans anymore? No. They were met with violent reprisals from the British. Was the Boston Tea Party a mistake that endangered civilians until the day that George Washington won? No. It was part and parcel of a campaign that they were justified in prosecuting.
Yeah, so the tar feathering didn't do, yeah, it in of itself, but didn't do much. I guess they were trying to show their dissatisfaction towards, being ruled by England. And in the
They were
end,
communicating to England that the occupation of the United States, exploitation of the United States, comes with a price. And when they negotiate that amongst themselves, they will pay, they'll pay the price of doing that, and that will be factored into their popular discourse, right? So when the British Parliament discusses and they say, "Oh well, we would made so much money in America with cotton and tobacco or whatever, but we keep having to send soldiers over there, and the American revolutionaries are fighting, a terrific war against us, and we're losing and dying, right?" Eventually, they're going to say, we should probably just leave, cut our losses, and then develop our relations with whatever comes next, right? This would never be the result of any particular military operation. It's the result of the entire campaign, right?
at what point would England have been the oppressed and the colonies the oppressor?
Would
But
England have been the oppressed? I'm
yeah,
not sure
yeah.
what you mean by that.
So like
I
what?
don't think that's possible.
Okay, yeah. So like, what would the colonies have to do to actually be the oppressor? Like,
Um, I
like,
don't
like,
know, like
like, let's say, yeah. Go ahead.
put genetically Anglo-Saxon people in concentration camps or something. I'm not sure. Like
Okay,
it's a pretty bizarre hypothetical.
I know it is. Here's where I'm getting at. What would have to happen for the Israel? Like, what would be too far? I guess. Like, um, Palestine wants his land back, right? What
Yes.
would be them going too far to like? What would have to happen for them to become the oppressor and for Israel to be the one that's being oppressed?
Oh, I mean, they would have to set up the entirely like mirror the apparatus, right? There would have to be a majority Arab state. Like Michael Brooks has a great passage about this, right? Have you seen his he has a video where he has a line where it's called "It's not complicated," right? And he basically walks you through like a 5 point plan where he reverses the roles, right? And he says, imagine we had a majority Arab state that had a minority of Jews that were being politically disenfranchised, and they had an occupation over the majority Jewish areas that they were demographically slimming down, right? They, maybe they controlled the imports of food and water to one of the territories, and then when quoted about it, their administrators said, "We need to put those Jews on a diet," right? Stuff like that. Absolutely, no one would have any problem calling that colonialism. No one would have any problem calling that apartheid or even genocide, right? And I mean, that would be certainly terrible if the roles were exactly reversed. But that's what we're talking about, right? Like, we need some. I want to have some perspective here, where like we're talking about what would it be going too far, right? Like, what if they conducted some operations of revenge against Israelis, right? Um, right now, the death counts are not even remotely symmetrical. They're not even in the same world. So I find it kind of concern trolling to begin to already step in and I don't know, guys. We might be just as bad as them or whatever. I think is a bit ridiculous, right? Like same thing with the Americans, in the Revolutionary War. Like I don't know if I would have stood in the town square and been like, well, what if we go too far? And what if we kill all the British? What if all this terrible stuff happens, right? So that we should probably pause fighting. We shouldn't do this stuff, right? Like, that's absurd. I don't think
Well,
that's
I'm
defensible.
asking that question because I think that like a moderate Muslim would give a different answer, a Muslim extremist would give a different answer, and then like somebody who's like you who's trying to be an ally, who who's not Muslim but is trying to be an ally of the Palestinian people, they would
Yes.
have, and I guess I'm trying to like see um what you want for the world. That was the purpose of the question. It wasn't really for me to be like, oh, like, oh no, those poor, like, oh, the
Yeah.
poor Israelis,
I just
nothing
don't
like
think
that.
it's relevant. I think we're talking about two totally different universes, right? Like, what if the roles were completely reversed? I think is a pretty asinine question. Like, the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, right? Like, what would Jews have to do to Nazi Germany in order for it to, the for it to be wrong? I think is a very stupid question.
I think it's one of the best questions I've ever asked. But no, but I can see that. I'm asking it. I'm asking it because um you're saying there's the justified resistance, right? And then you would also have us. You would have also agreed that the Jews during persecution in Germany, Nazi Germany, that they would have had the right to resist because they were
They
the ones
did. I
being oppressed.
absolutely endorse their right to resist, and they did.
Okay. I guess if the Jews did not resist there, then well, they were going to die anyway, but they would have been just sent to the
Yes.
camps and or shot in the back of the head. If
Yes.
but here, if I guess this is why I'm still supporting Israel to a certain degree, is because I just feel like if the Palestinians stop resisting, then they're gonna be able to bring in more work permits, and then they're gonna be able to work together the way, and then the economy is gonna improve. They're gonna lift their embargo, but on the other hand, it's like the Israelis are still occupying the land that's not theirs, so it's like that would be the justification for the resistance. So it's like the question is, do we want more resistance or do we want cooperation with a colonial state?
I mean, if you're arguing that like the best option right now is for Israel to be merciful in its victory towards the Palestinians and for them to acquiesce to that, I just don't think you have that standard for any other group, right? Like, I don't think I think that's a self-serving platform. I think arguing that way in other contexts would be viewed as disgusting, right? So I'll give you an example. This was Gandhi's solution to the Holocaust, right? Gandhi was quoted. He wrote a letter to I forget actually who it was, but he wrote a letter, basically an open letter addressing the Jewish community after learning about the Holocaust. And Gandhi's position was that the Jews should, quote, offer themselves up onto the butcher's knife, right? And basically allow themselves to be eradicated so that the world would finally do something, right? Um, that I shouldn't have to tell you why that's absurd, right? Like
Yes.
that's expecting or telling them that their best hope is to beg for mercy in the victory of their that we agreed earlier was a apartheid occupier state or whatever. I just fundamentally disagree with that.
Yes, me too.
Um,
Yeah, I think that would have been a stupid solution.
yeah, well, I mean, that isn't that what you're saying Palestinians should basically do? They should disarm all of their active military, irregular military forces. They should cut off their ties with countries like Iran and stuff like that, so that they can cooperate and negotiate with Israel. Right? Doesn't that constitute just
If
acquiescence to isn't that just a prayer for mercy on behalf of Israel?
well, I think that if Israel had the intention of doing what Germany wanted to do with the Jews, then absolutely, I would 100% agree that they had to resist no matter what.
Sure, but let's take the mechanized Holocaust aspect out of it, right? Let's focus on just Lebensraum, right? So they wanted to conquer much of Eastern Europe, and they wanted to settle Germans in, and then obviously the state that exists there would be a German priority state, right? Do Polish people have to acquiesce to that because resisting is going to cause many more Polish people to die?
Hey man, if the Swedish people conquered a part of the United States and then I get free healthcare,
No,
and all
I'm
I
sorry,
like
buddy, but
I'll take it. I'll take that.
no, no.
I'll
If the
take it.
Swedish people conquered America and demographically replaced you and
Yeah.
installed a
A social
Swedish
state, social Swedish
no 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 no
social. I would take it. I'm not saying they should. I'm not
dude,
saying
I'm
they
sorry,
should.
but you're like
I'm
joking
not
about
saying they
this.
should. No, no,
You're
I'm serious. I would if I get all the benefits of Sweden, if I get conquered and they get to do they
What?
get
Okay,
to,
excuse
yeah,
me.
yeah.
What benefits do you think the Palestinians have to being conquered and what you agreed is an apartheid state and colonialized is colonized by Israel?
Oh, what benefits?
Yeah, I think you agreed that there are some pretty severe drawbacks to this, right? I.e., like being a captive population in apartheid.
So so tell me about, okay, tell me about that captivity aspect to it. Like,
Are you going to answer any of this stuff? Like,
wait, what do you,
hold on,
okay, wait,
dude.
ask the
Like,
question again. I want to answer. I don't want to be an asshole who doesn't answer questions. I ask it again. I'm sorry.
so we're just talking about like Lebensraum, right? The not necessarily a totally industrial genocide of all the Polish people, right? But what we are talking about is when the Nazis invaded Poland, right? They had a plan to settle Germans in the area, right, to enlarge the size of the German state, and the Polish people who lived there would become minorities in Germany, which obviously was a state that prioritized Germans at the expense of other people, right?
Yeah.
I think if we take out, we don't have to include any other mass murder. We don't have to do anything. We can make the case very cleanly right there, right? Would you suggest that the Polish people should not resist that status because it'll cause German reprisals against the Polish?
If the Polish had equal rights, then creating those, I'll answer you. I'll answer you.
But they don't, right? So like, let's do exact mirror for Israel, West Bank, and Gaza. We have, I don't know, Reichskommissariat Ostland or whatever. You know what I mean? We have some other German breakaway territory that they're using to demographically replace and colonize that area, right? I'm saying factor out any mass programs of mass murder or whatever. It's still, you wouldn't agree that the Polish people just are like the best they can hope for is that the German regime is merciful in their victory, right? And that they should just not fight this at all because the Germans are just going to kill them.
Well, if the Germans are going to kill them, then they have to resist no matter what.
Well, I mean, kill them in
Yeah.
reprisal for resistance, right?
Oh, kill them in reprisal for. Look, I can't speak for another nation. I would try to. I would not violently resist if,
You
like,
would
me.
not violently resist Nazi colonization if it didn't include the Holocaust mass murder.
If the Nazis weren't mass murdering anybody, and all I had to do was submit. Well, submit.
Yes, all you have to do is submit. So we're back in the
to their
Romani
majority,
state.
submit to their majority. They're the
Yes.
ones. They just have the majority. I have the same rights as them, and there's no
No, you
genocide.
don't have the same rights because we already established this multiple times in the West Bank, in Gaza. They don't have the same rights. So you get to live in your special German occupation zone, right? And you don't vote, and the state is run on behalf of German interests, right? And you're a Polish person. If you resist, they will attack and kill you. They will attack and kill civilians in reprisal. Is it immoral for you to resist?
I think that in a situation like that, there will be people who resist, and those like me who will not.
You
If
would
they're
not resist?
well, if it's gonna cause people that I care about or that I love to get bombed, I don't think I would. But if we just don't resist, then we're not. This is my like, I understand why you would not,
Yeah.
why you think that's disgusting. I really
But
do.
okay, but hold on. Like, imagine we live. I'm with you right now. But imagine we live in Alex world where everyone thinks this way, right?
Yeah.
Would the entire globe not still be covered in colonies?
Would they resist if they're not given equal rights? The equal rights. So it's like I'll let me see. Would I resist? I would resist if it's becoming a danger to the people that I love. If they're
The occupation claims tens of thousands of lives, right? Like it's clearly dangerous to people, right? So
if we're doing the hypothetical example, you're saying it claims the tens of thousands of lives. Well, the the amount of people who died in the strikes in the past few months, they would we could agree that a lot of them would not be dead if Israel didn't do their bombing raids because they die from the bombs. But if October 7 didn't happen, then a lot of those people would still be alive, but there would still be but you would still justify other forms of
I mean,
resistance.
I'll just ask you again, right? Like, the Boston Tea Party happens. If we don't do it, people stay alive. You know, the British don't come in a reprisal. They don't violently massacre people in the street, right? If we not only do the Boston Tea Party, but a campaign of resistance against the British, we live in the world we do now, where we have the United States of America, right? Like, I don't know what.
They wanted to. No, I'm okay with the United States creating their own country. I'm okay with the United States creating their own country.
How did we do that? Like,
Well, we said that we want to create our own country, and British came in with their troops, and we just killed them.
and they massacred the British massacred people in the United States, right?
Yeah.
So at that time, was the Boston Tea Party wrong because it precipitated massacres and violence against civilians by the British?
Well, how did the massacre happen? Was it instigated
By the
by
Boston Tea
somebody
Party, yes.
by rock throwing?
Dude, you can't be. I'm sorry, dude. This is crazy. But you know exactly what I'm leading you down, right? And then you get to this point, and then we get a joke and laughing, right? But
All right, I'm sorry.
like, if this is your sincere prescription, right? Like, I live in Algeria or whatever, and I'm being attacked by the French. I know that if I resist, the French will attack me and
If
they'll
I'm
attack my
attacked by
family,
somebody,
right?
I'm resisting. If I'm attacked by somebody, I'm resisting.
Yes. So was the French colonization of Algeria, did that constitute an attack in and of itself, right? Is the establishment of French rule in Algeria?
Does it constitute an attack if
Does
it
that
just
constitute
by
offense in and of itself?
if the this look I know that we disagree on this, and I know how that you think that like my opinion about it is harmful, but if the people that I love are safe and they have all their needs met, and if they have equal rights,
But you won't. I mean, it.
then
If the situation is totally different, then you agree, right? But you don't agree with the situation or the hypothetical that I'm giving you right now, right?
that there are no equal rights. That's the hypothetical.
Yes, like there are not in Gaza and the West Bank.
I guess the reason why it's difficult for okay, I'll tell you why I'm being a little bit annoying about this. I guess a part of me thinks that if if the people of Gaza and West Bank they stop doing their terror attacks, there will be more again more work permits, which is what happened in those 2 years of the fake ceasefire. They were given more work permits, so then they could work in Israel. The people of Gaza were coming through the checkpoints to work in Israel, and and I feel like there would be more of that, and then we could create a two-state solution where they're both benefiting from each other economically, and we won't really need the violent resistance, but there would still be. And then if they have their own state, then they could then Palestine could have their own elections, and then the Muslims in Israel who are citizens they could participate in Israeli elections.
I mean, sure, like hypothetically, if the British were just going to give us independence anyway, right? Would the American Revolution have been a mistake? I don't know, maybe, but they weren't going to, and they didn't. Like, they weren't going. The French weren't going to give Algerians a state unless they resisted, right? This is what I said. Remember, if we like take ourselves in Alex world, right, where everyone thinks this way, the entire world would still be covered in colonies, right? They were violently resisted absolutely everywhere, and I just don't understand what the motivation would be. Like,
I think
would the French have pulled out of Algeria, or Israel have given the Palestinians a state out of the goodness of their own heart? Like,
well, have you been to Israel? Have you talked
no,
to
I
Israeli
haven't been
people?
Israel.
Have
No,
you talked to Israeli people?
I've talked to Israeli people in my personal life. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. What do they seem like people who like to point guns at people and like just say do whatever the hell I want you to do?
I don't see why that's relevant at all. The government is
So
committed
so
to a
I think
policy of.
I think that the Israeli people are a little different than the French colonizers. Same way the French colonizers were different than British and American
Have you
colonizers.
ever met a French person in your life?
Yeah.
Do you think? Have you ever met a Belgian?
Have I ever met a Belgian? I don't
Yeah,
think
have you ever
so.
met a Belgian?
No.
Do you no? Okay. Well, if you had, right? If I told you I was Belgian, which I'm not, right?
Okay.
Would you think I was immediately the kind of person to cut your hands off for not meeting a rubber quota or something like that?
No.
No, but it happened. There were people who did that, and that was a policy of the Belgian state.
No, but that's what I'm saying. I think that I don't think the Israelis do anything like that. And I think that if you talk to Israeli people, they
Do
actually
what? Occupy Gaza? Have an
no
apartheid
chop
state?
chop people's hands off as punishment. Um,
But
well,
we agreed that it's an apartheid state. We agreed that it's an occupation. You're now they don't do anything like apartheid or occupation.
like apartheid and occupation. I want to answer your question because I don't because I hate it when people don't answer my questions. Okay. Yes, we agree that they're an apartheid state, and yes, they're doing apartheid things and occupation things. Okay, I'll agree there. But
So the case QED, the case is made, is it not? Right? You're
well,
saying I
yeah,
wouldn't
yes.
resist if I had equal rights, if I had X, Y, and Z. We've established that they don't have that. So they have the right to resist, correct?
Well, yeah, yes, everybody has the right to resist.
Amazing. Then
No, no, but will resisting, but what will more resist? Everybody has the right to resist. But like again, that's why I asked about the goal. Let's say they keep resisting, what's going to happen? And then the years, some of the years where there were less terror attacks, and we could count terror attacks by deaths in Israel. Um, in those 2 years, Israel was giving more work permits to the people of Gaza, and it's like, yeah, it's not their
But this
country.
is the
It's not.
merciful in
I
victory,
know, I know, I
like this
know,
is
I
you get
know,
more work permits, right?
I
You're
know,
still kind of a second class citizen, but hey,
I know, I
you
know.
could come and work here. What it's not so bad. The Nazis or whatever, they might have allowed Polish people to work for wages, right? And at businesses in Germany and all that stuff, right? So, they basically they should have just
You're
let it go, right?
you're not
Algerians were working in French businesses using French infrastructure the whole time, right?
you're not
That
making a
wasn't a
bad
gift to
point.
them.
You're not making a bad point. I know I understand the point that you're making. That's why
Yeah.
I was asking about the intentions. German, like in your
I
scenario.
don't care about the intentions. So we've talked about this before. I'm sorry, I cut you off too. That was bad right there. But I'm gonna finish this and then we're gonna go. Okay.
Okay.
I don't care about intentions. I'm a socialist, right? I care about material phenomenon, like the incentives and what's actually happening there, right? If you told me one person did a crime with a horrible intention and another person did a crime with something less horrible intention, I'm not really concerned about that, right? If we colonized and eradicated all of the Native Americans in the United States, right? If the whole time the Native Americans wanted to wipe out everyone in America, that factually didn't happen. They don't have moral culpability for that. I don't think that factors at all into appraising, whether their resistance was faithful or correct or not.
So where do you think I'm like being unfair?
Um, I think you're just kind of refusing to answer the question as to whether. Well, okay, here. I don't think you're refusing to answer the question. I think you conceded the argument and you're acting like you haven't, right? Because you told me that they are under occupation. They do live in an apartheid state, right?
Based on talking to you and the new details that you gave, yes.
Yes. They you have a right to resist in that scenario, right? Under occupation, being deprived of your rights, right? You have a right to resist that by violent means, correct? But you see what I'm talking about is if I asked you about any other nation, you wouldn't have this like I got to think about why this is actually wrong, like phase, right?
I don't know if there's
You would just
another.
say, well, of course, Like
No, you gave me that
Ukraine has a
Germany.
right to defend themselves if the Russians are going to invade their country, right? Like,
They have a right to defend themselves against the military, yes, but they don't have the right to like kill civilians. And I know we agreed on that. So
yeah.
I guess against military, you could would they have the right to?
But is it
Yeah, yeah,
Israel's
yeah, yeah.
position that they have the
In
right
Ukraine,
to resist against military targets, right? No, it's not.
wait, what? What?
It's not Israel's position that they have the right to retaliate against military targets within Israel, right? Like,
Does Ukraine target personnel or does it target military equipment? It wouldn't matter. I think that targeting military equipment would be 100% justified.
yeah,
And if soldiers die, if soldiers
yes,
die during an occupation, then so be it. If you're targeting the
yes.
military infrastructure and the soldiers die, then so be it.
But
Okay,
this, I mean,
I'll
this is
go.
a 180 from your, just so you know, like this is a 180 from your previous position,
Well,
right?
this is why I like talking to people who
Yeah,
oppose my viewpoints, and I keep trying to talk to people who are pro-Palestine, and they always refuse. I like having these discussions because I need to open up my consciousness like a little bit
sure.
more. And there's no way that we could come to an agreement on anything if we don't
Yeah,
these discussions. And I had to be responsible and say like where I'm wrong and where I'm not wrong.
yeah, I appreciate that. I
And it
mean,
was very
yeah,
difficult for me to do this, by the way,
sure.
for me to concede on certain points.
I just, yeah, I mean, I guess my message to you then would be it's getting kind of late. Like we could wrap it up in a minute. But you know, I want you to remember this, right? Like all of this stuff. I want you to take everything I said to the bank and go look it up and triple check it, right? Um, but this, I don't think you had a great answer for a lot of my stuff. I think you very obviously paused to give, you know, intellectual, thoughtful privilege to Israel in a way that you don't for other historical contexts, right? Um, and I don't know. I think you should reflect on that. I think you have confidence in some of these beliefs that I don't think withheld a lot of scrutiny. Um, I don't know what other way to put it.
Well, I don't know how I feel about the whole privilege thing. I don't know if there are other conflicts that are like this. If there are, like, for example, what Saudi Arabia is doing to Yemen. Yeah, Saudi Arabia is an ally to the United States, but with the 400,000 people that they starved, like that's different than what's happening. I think that all the other atrocities that have happened are different than the one in Israel and with Palestine. I think that they're 100% different. So
Yeah,
that's why I treat that conflict differently from everything else. It's not because it's white people and like
sure.
I'm some white supremacist. It's not
What I'm
that.
telling you is like it's my observation that you couldn't substantiate why that's the case, why it's different, right?
I did. I did
No,
because
you did not. I'm sorry.
no, because I did. I said
When?
when the terrorist bombing stopped, Israel negotiates and they create more work opportunities and the economy improves for Gaza and the West Bank. And when the terrorism continues, then they do the embargo. I don't know, but you're saying that they
And
have to keep
we
resisting.
so I'm saying you privilege Israel in these historical examples that I've walked you through, right? Every step of the way, I've walked you through a historical example. I've shown you how it connects to Israel. You've immediately agreed with my historical example, and you took a pause and you said, "Am I?" You literally said several times, "Am I the bad guy? I need to
Yeah,
think about this. How is
yeah,
Israel still right?" Right? Isn't
yeah.
that clearly a privilege there? You didn't say, "Oh well, how are the French right in Algeria?" and I just don't realize it yet. You didn't say, "Oh well, how are the British right in America?" and I just don't realize it yet, right? You were willing to accept all of my historical scenarios, and then when I tied it close to Israel, that one required some thought,
But
right?
why? Because Israel treats the people that they're occupying differently than most of the other colonizing forces.
We agreed immediately prior to this that that was irrelevant and that occupation and apartheid are enough to permit violent resistance.
I no. No,
No. So if I
no.
occupied and took away your right to vote or whatever, that's you don't get to resist that.
If I stop resisting and I get my right to vote, yeah, I'll stop resisting.
So under what circumstance do you think the Palestinians are going to get the right to vote in Israeli
Two-state solution.
elections?
Two-state solution.
In a two-state solution, the
Yes.
people in another country are going to vote in Israeli elections.
Why would the Israelis want people from the Gaza Strip or West Bank voting in their elections?
That's my question to you. That's why they have them disenfranchised and in occupation, so that they can demographically replace them until the demographic situation is what they want. And then they will allow everyone to vote when they know it's not a threat to their political situation.
I don't
That's
like
why the
this.
territories are occupied. That's why the settlements exist. That's why expulsions exist. That's why they make life difficult in the occupied territories.
I don't like where this conversation ended at all. And
Listen, dude, I'm not surprised you don't.
And I know, and like despite some of the I think hurtful things that you've called me, and I could say some pretty bad things too.
What did I call
I
you?
still think that you're a likable character.
What did I call you?
You said that some of my statements and opinions were asinine. I didn't really like that. Or yeah,
I don't think I said asinine, but
well, you said a word that's very. I think you said
myopic.
asinine.
I think I said.
I think you said myopic and asinine.
I
We'll
think some of the
we'll
objections were absolutely asinine.
All right, there we go. There we go.
I'm sorry. We're having an
think-
interview about politics, not a popularity contest. I'll just cop to that. I don't know what to tell you.
I don't like where it ended. You're right about a lot of things. You changed my mind on a lot of things, and I really like that. You haven't changed my mind fully on many things also. I don't like that you're not trying to see my perspective at all. I don't like a lot of things about it, but I am happy that we did this interview. Like
I'm happy we did the
really
interview,
happy.
but I mean, look, really, like, what about your perspective you've presented to me, right? Because you've backed off against so many things that you've said throughout the course of the interview.
Which is good. Isn't that what you would have wanted for me to like change
Yes,
my
but
mind
what
about
perspective am I supposed to listen to? The one you recanted prior? Like, I'm not sure.
The perspective of like all the changes that I made, it hasn't changed one thing. No, it hasn't changed me on one main topic, which is why I'm doing these interviews. The whole point of these interviews is one thing. It's like, okay, what now? And yeah, I changed my mind on some of the definitions and the colonialism, apartheid, and all those things. But the more violent resistance that's going to happen, it's like, okay, then let's say there's another chunk of land that Palestine might get back, and then what? And then what? And like, I would like a solution, because the only way for there to be a solution is if somebody like you and me, we come to an agreement on something that has never happened in the history of this conflict. There has never been a time where somebody who's pro-Israel had an agreement on with somebody who is pro-Palestine. That's never happened. That's why I'm doing these interviews. So even though you are right about a lot of things, I still don't want more Palestinian people to die.
Sure. I mean, I don't think I want Palestinian people to die, right? I mean, I guess so. You'd be right there with me, and now that we agreed, it's like apartheid and occupation, all that stuff. You'd be right there with me in, like, for example, like a sanctions campaign against Israel.
To achieve what?
By the United States.
Okay, so they have less money, so they have less precision guided missiles. Now they have to use shells that they import from like Russia or North Korea, and now more people are going to die because Israel's going to want to defend itself no matter what.
Oh,
Good
no
for
way.
you.
I
Good
mean,
for you. Good for you.
Listen, buddy,
well,
I can
how does
quote,
that solve anything? How does that solve
I
anything?
can quote Yoav Gallant, right, the defense minister of Israel right now, saying we can do nothing without the Americans, right? In the Suez crisis, Israel had total military supremacy over the Egyptians, right? Still, an American phone call. They were getting ready to cross the canal, right? Still, America stepped in and said, sorry, you don't get to do that, right? And they had no choice but to comply, right? Why did they feel like they had no choice but to comply? Was it because they wouldn't get $9 billion in aid, they wouldn't get guided missiles, and they would just keep going on anyway? No.
Israel can't do anything without the United States. You're right.
They would lose the support of the patron that is absolutely necessary for their survival. They need the voice in the UN. They need the vetoes on the Security Council. They need the money and they need the weapons. The position of the Israeli government is not, whatever, the Americans, they'll help us or not, like we can continue without them. The position of the Israeli government is to spend a lot of money and a lot of personnel and a lot of effort securing the special relationship they have with the United States, right? So if we went on a sanctions campaign against them, and you're saying all that would happen is business goes on as usual.
No, it
There's
won't.
no
It
way.
won't. Israel will be hurt economically, and when a country is hurt economically and they don't have enough money to fund the Iron Dome because you're getting rid of the military aid, and now you have to use other means of going in and just like annihilating even more people in Gaza than they are
Sure. I
annihilating
mean,
now.
should
Good
we
for
have,
so that's an amazing solution. Wow, that's an amazing. I don't. Why is that
buddy,
good?
hold on. Should we have given millions of dollars in guided munitions to like Saddam Hussein so that he could kill fewer Kuwaitis when he invaded Kuwait?
That's a good point. No, no, wait, what? No, he invaded Kuwait to take the resources. Um, Kuwait didn't. Kuwait wasn't doing terror attacks
Okay, so
into Kuwait.
Russia, right now, I'm sure you're aware they're using North Korean shells in
Yeah,
Ukraine, right?
yes.
So
Dude, how do you
that
know all this stuff? You're fucking smart, man. Okay, yeah, sorry, continue.
yeah, dog. I don't know. I'm probably a little bit older than you, so but as we know, Russia is using North Korean shells in its attack on Ukraine or whatever. Should we
Yeah.
give Russia shiny new guided missiles so that they hit their targets more often and kill fewer civilians?
Ukraine didn't cause terrorist attacks in Russia, and neither did Kuwait in
Does that
Iraq.
change our perspective towards like I don't understand how that's relevant to the question, right?
Yeah, no, it's I think it's relevant because I have seen a pattern that when terror attacks go down, then Israel negotiates more with the people of Palestine and Gaza. They give more economic opportunities. That's what I've seen. If it was the opposite, I would be
Yeah.
100% with you. I would be 100% with you saying resistance is the only violent resistance is the only way. I would be there with you.
Okay, so what's the problem with Ukraine just gives in to Russian demands and they don't do that, right? And they're according to you, right? They're bad for fighting Russia because it's causing civilians to get killed, and they could just give in to what Russia wants, right?
They could just give in. Um, I think it's a little different only because of the U.S. involvement in instigating the conflict.
I will find some agreement there, I guess, but like you see where all this is going, right? Like this is the I at the very beginning of this conversation we talked about, you know, I'm taken hostage along with 4 other people, right? If I try to escape, the hostage taker is going to kill one of them or kill 2 of them, right? Every time I retaliate. Is it wrong for me to retaliate? If I retaliated and escaped and the hostage taker did kill 2 people, would when the news people greet me outside, would they be judging me and saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe you got 2 people killed. Why are you not thinking about the situation?" Like
Well, in that scenario, I would agree. Like you would have to resist if you're taken as a hostage. Yeah,
even if it meant the hostage taker would retaliate against the
yeah,
hostages and I would still fail, right?
because you're taken hostage. Yeah,
Yeah. I think we could leave it right there. I think
we can. I have a rebuttal to it, but we could leave it right there. Um, yeah,
I'm pretty hungry. I gotta eat some
yeah.
food. I got home from work late, so it's
I
like 11 o'clock and I still haven't eaten anything.
thank you for staying later.
Listen, buddy, I'm sorry if I got like I'm sorry if you feel like I insulted you in any way. I don't mean to do that. I'm not trying to say you're stupid or you're saying asinine stuff. I do think some of the stuff you said was ridiculous, right? Because we disagree on it. That's what disagreement means, right? If you want
I'm
to talk
okay
about
with
this
it.
stuff again,
I don't care that much
sure,
about.
yeah, no. Well, I'm happy you do, right? I just want to make sure of that I don't want to like be a bully or something like that, right? But if you want to talk about this again, I'm happy to talk about it again. If you want to talk about socialism next time, I'm happy to talk about socialism. I appreciated talking to you. I guess we got a little more ground than I thought we would, so that's one thing we could be happy about, right?
Yeah, if we could, we'll talk. Thank you again for doing this.
Yeah, absolutely, no problem. And have a great night.
Yeah, you too.
All right, it was nice meeting you. Nice talking to you, Alex.
You too.
All right, goodbye.